Business app or anywhere you get your podcasts. Bloomberg Podcasts. Context changes everything.
As veterans, we're no strangers to helping others.
That's what we were taught, service before self.
But we do have one question for the veterans listening.
When was the last time you reached out for help?
If you or someone you know needs resources, whether it's for stress, finances, employment, or mental health, don't wait. Reach out.
Find more information at va.gov/reach. That's va.gov/reach.
Brought to you by the United States Department of Veterans Affairs and the Ad Council.
On a recent edition of the Big Take podcast, President Trump says his decision on who will succeed Fed Chair Jerome Powell is coming out very soon. Bloomberg's Nancy Cook and Saleha Mosen join host David Gura to discuss their reporting that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is a contender for the job.
Without giving away secrets or sourcing, sort of how did you learn about this, learn that his name is in the running as this process unfolds?
Well, Saleha and I sit next to each other in the office, just to give you a little bit of a view of the DC office. And so she and I sort of talk to each other all day long, and we're both really interested in economics and politics. And so she had said to me last week, oh, I hear Scott Bessent for Fed. Isn't that interesting? And so we both just started sort of asking sources and talking to people, around DC, around Wall Street, throughout the political organizations. And his name kept coming up, and it came up often enough that we felt comfortable reporting it.
Saleha, you reached out to the Treasury Secretary, to Scott Bessent, for comment. What did he tell you?
His comment was interesting, was on the record, and he said that I have the best job in Washington, and it is up to the president to decide who is going to oversee the U.S. economy. I found it interesting that he didn't take that moment to outright deny it. He didn't say, I'm not going to comment on this story at all, or thread the needle somehow. He decided to just not fan the flames, but not put the story down. So
that's what the Treasury Secretary said to you. What did the White House say?
The White House said that this is fake news.
They dispute the premise of the piece. They say that he's not in the running.
They said that this is not an accurate report.
Actually, the senior administration official just said to me, this is fake news, and then wouldn't get into the specifics about what was wrong or what was fake, but this was their party line.
That's what's on a recent edition of the Big Take podcast. Listen to the full episode on Apple, Spotify, the Bloomberg Business app, or anywhere you get your podcasts.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is the Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker, the Bloomberg News, with this Bloomberg Business Flash being brought to you by Oracle. Attention growing businesses, Oracle offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. This is for new U.S. customers with minimum financial commitments. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/Bloomberg. 6 of the 11 major industry groups in the S&P 500 lower right now. The biggest drag coming from industrials, and that's home to Boeing. The stock also the worst performing stock in the S&P 500 and the Dow Jones Industrial Average. It is down right now 4% even. And also GE, which actually is GE Aerospace, that's down just over 2%. The maker of the Air India engines actually has a bigger weighting than Boeing in the S&P 500. I don't know if you've ever seen them test. I had the advantage of seeing them test airline engines.
Yes.
They literally throw frozen birds into the engines at full.
Are you serious?
Yeah, seriously, and then check the engine for a deflection or breakage of any of the titanium fans. U.S. Producer Price Index rising 0.1% for the month of May. Got that data this morning. Muted inflation across the board. No sign of price shocks from tariffs yet on the data. And before the long bond auction, yields are lower. The long bond right now, the 30-year, down almost 5 basis points, 486. The twos, which are more policy reactive, they're down 4 basis points. That is at 390. S&P 500 up 10 points. The Dow 28 points lower. NASDAQ 100 up 43 points. We check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Alex and Paul.
All right, John Tucker, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney live here in the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York City, or streaming live on YouTube as well. All right, let's talk inflation. Yesterday, remember, we had the CPI data came out, and it came in a little less than expected. So we called that benign inflation, I think was the term we used. As John was just mentioning, we got the PPI out today. John characterized it as muted. I'll go with that. PPI final demand month to month, 0.1%. Consensus was 0.2%. And then if you annualize all this stuff and say PPI X food, energy, and trade year over year came in at 2.7%. Consensus was 3%. So that's a pretty big beat, I would say. Jeffrey Cleveland joins us, chief economist at Payden & Regal out there in L.A. Jeffrey, what did you make of yesterday's CPI, today's PPI? What's your call on inflation these days?
Well, Paul, not only was it benign for May, that's 4 months in a row. So 4 months in a row after, a January hot start to the year, CPI has been soft. I know the inflationistas listening are going to say that, just wait another month and the tariff toll will hit. And that is possible. But I would point out that in the data we saw yesterday, it wasn't just that goods prices were soft, also services prices were soft. So, housing,
Jeffrey, are we all clear?
But also non-housing services. I wouldn't say they're all clear, Alex, but I mean, it's we're getting there. We're getting close to saying all clear. I think another couple of months, I'll declare the all clear. I think also with this morning's PPI, you throw that in the mix. You could imagine a soft reading for core PCE when it comes out at the end of this month, which is what the Fed is more focused on. And I think very good news for the central bank and for the bond market. So soft inflation readings.
So, Jeff, is we're not necessarily seeing any inflation in the numbers yet. Maybe we will in the future. Is that a reflection of companies just kind of eating the cost increases that they are experiencing, maybe taking in the margin as opposed to passing them along to consumers?
That's a possibility, Paul. It's possible. We just haven't seen the pass through yet. People are shifting their behaviors. People are making up for it in other ways and not passing it through into prices. I think all of those are in the mix. I think for one thing we've been telling clients is that keep in mind imported goods in terms of the PCE index are 6, 7, 8% of the index. So you could see potential price increases on those goods, but you have to keep in mind most of what you spend your money on, Paul, are things like services. And those, we still see scope for services to continue to cool off. And certainly we saw that in May. So that could outweigh some of the tariff price increase. So that's a good news. So I think by the end of the year, so if you can look out 6 months or so, I think inflation will continue to moderate.
Okay, so if we are in this disinflationary environment right now, well, actually, would you categorize this as disinflation?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we peaked in 2022 at a very high level on core inflation. It's been coming down. It's been coming down slower than we would have hoped, but it is disinflating. So I think we're definitely in a disinflationary environment right now. Yes.
So if it's disinflationary, is that enough for the Fed to cut in July, September, preemptively?
I think you have to step back here. If you put yourselves in the shoes of the Fed, you're at 450 on the funds rate. I would categorize that, Alex, as restrictive. So they have a restrictive policy setting, but we just talked about it. Inflation is cooling, disinflation. And the other thing that you brought up earlier on the segment, which was wonderful, we are seeing a slowdown in the labor market. So with that backdrop, I think the next move from the Fed is a cut. The question is, when are they comfortable doing that? I don't think it's likely next week, but I think the market should start pricing in July, should start entertaining July. But we think by September, guys, we'll have some evidence enough where they could possibly cut.
If that's the scenario and inflation, is not necessarily a concern here or a big concern, what does that do to your GDP outlook for the remainder of this year?
We cut our GDP, Paul, after the tariff turmoil really broke out starting February 2nd. That Sunday afternoon, my team got together and we cut our GDP. So we went down to 1% for 2025, Q4 to Q4. We brought that actually up a little bit in recent weeks. So we're around 1.5% for the year. That's not a recession, Paul. I would characterize that as subpar economic growth, so sub-trend. But that doesn't really change here with this disinflation story. I think that will be the case. We'll have subpar growth. We'll avoid a recession, but we'll have disinflation. That's good for bonds. I think especially the long end of the treasury market is really been pushed up by fears of the fiscal, fears of inflation from tariffs. And if all of that sort of fades, bonds look good. We have a good setup here for the bond market over the second half of the year, in my view.
Really? Deficits included in that?
Yeah, I mean, the deficits, Alex, this is the most widely known story on earth. I mean, I'm talking to global clients for years. They've been looking at the U.S. budget deficit. It's huge. I'm not denying that, 6 or 7% of GDP. I don't think that's going to change next year with the big, beautiful budget bill. But I think that's priced in. We see that in, I think, the slope of the curve in term premium that's been built into 10s and 30-year treasuries. So that's known. That's a known. I think as we move on beyond that, people are going to realize the real story here is, okay, what happens with growth and what happens with inflation? That will drive markets.
Hey, Jeffrey, I know you're in LA. You're an LA guy. Give us a sense of what's happening out there.
Well, I'm 25 miles from downtown LA today, as you can see here in the home office. Part of that is because Payden & Regal offices are, in the heart of it, downtown Los Angeles, which enjoyed such a great resurgence pre-COVID. It was a renaissance, if you will, of people living and working down there. So the events that we've seen in the last week or so, really unfortunate, causing a lot of uncertainty here on the West Coast. I think as far as it pertains to the economic data, I mean, the big thing we're watching here, Paul, is the labor force. You saw that actually in the May jobs report. Labor force participation went down. We like to look at the labor force flows. So every month you can look at the number of people that are going from being employed, for example, to out of the labor force. And in May, that number was the biggest increase that we've seen outside of COVID in the last 25 years. It could be retirements. It could be people leaving the labor force for reasons other, than work-related, maybe family-related reasons. But it could also be related to the immigration issues. So I think we need to keep an eye on that, because the labor force participation is a key part of economic growth.
Jeffrey, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate getting your time. Jeffrey Cleveland, Chief Economist, Payden & Regal, joining us via Zoom from Los Angeles, where he is based. Michael McKee, darkens the door here. He does all the economic stuff for us here at Bloomberg. Mike, we were just talking to Jeffrey Cleveland about this. I mean, if you look at the CPI data yesterday, the PPI data today, I'm like, I'm not seeing any inflation out there. Is this just a timing thing? Do we need to be patient? Or is there something else going on in the economy that may be mitigating some of the tariff-related inflationary pressures?
There's a little bit of all of that in there. The biggest thing is the tariffs haven't really hit yet. Most of them were paused by the president. In areas where we have had tariffs, like steel, we did see in the PPI today a 7.1% rise in steel prices last month. So there are sectors affected by tariffs where tariffs are leaking through. In the CPI, washing machines went up over 4%. So, there is some pass-through that is happening. But for the most part, we're still waiting to see what the tariffs are before we get the tariff effects. Interesting note, speaking of Donald Trump and not knowing what he's doing, Jeff Cleveland was just talking about the labor force flows, and especially out in California. I don't know if you saw this tweet a few minutes ago from Donald Trump about the farmers complaining that the deportation policy is taking a lot of workers away from them, and it seems to be getting on the president's agenda. And he says changes are coming. So I don't know what that means, but I'm sure that people in many agricultural communities are worried, because it's the undocumented people who come in and do all the work in the fields, and those people, as I understand it, have started to disappear because they don't want to be disappeared.
To that point, when we saw the continuing jobless claims increase, so basically people who are unemployed are having a harder time getting jobs, why? Like, is there a sector breakdown?
No, there's not a sector breakdown. But what we're seeing is general reluctance by companies to do anything.
Oh, I see.
They're not. It's not that they're letting people go in vast numbers, and they're definitely not hiring. They're waiting because they don't know either, and that's what you get from all the Fed officials that you talk to or I talk to these days. Is they're relying on what companies are telling them they're doing, which is basically just sitting and waiting for some sort of guidance on which way the administration is going to go. If Trump takes off all the tariffs and they lighten up now on the immigration thing, then maybe the economy starts to rebound and people feel better about it and companies go back to investing. Otherwise, they might start laying people off, figuring demand is going to slow.
And the jobless claims, 248, is that getting to a level that get your attention at all, or we just
well,
let's look at it?
It would be if we thought that that was an ongoing process. The problem is this is a time of year when it's really hard to seasonally adjust for jobless claims because the dates of the things that happen, like Memorial Day, and then when school gets out, move around. And this is a time of year when a lot of people who work in schools, not teachers so much, but all the support people, they get laid off because it's the end of the school year, and so they can go file for jobless claims. And so the Department of Labor knows this, and they try to adjust for it, but they can't get it exactly right.
I see.
But we haven't seen a big spike. We saw it go up, and then it stayed that way. If it goes much higher, then you would start to worry.
All right, Mike. Always appreciate it. Michael McKee, Bloomberg International Economics and Policy Correspondent, joining us there. And just taking a look at what's happening in the bond market, we are off. The bid is strong, but not as strong as it was, is what I mean. The 2-year yield is now down only 4 basis points. You got the 10-year down by about 3.7 basis points there. So what that winds up meaning then for the Fed, as Jeffrey Cleveland was talking about, he thinks that they should go ahead and cut, that the disinflationary trend could stay. This is Bloomberg.
CBS News Brief. It's unclear why an Air India plane carrying 242 people crashed right after takeoff in northwestern India, slamming into a residential neighborhood. The flight was bound for London. CBS's Chris Livesay's at Gatwick.
CBS was able to verify that the tail of the plane landed on what is a hospital. Several homes were destroyed and emergency crews are working at the site.
Sources tell CBS News Israel's getting ready to launch an operation into Iran. Our Olivia Gazis at the State Department.
Concerns about the possibility of an Israeli strike have been percolating for a while, with Israeli officials arguing that now is the time to strike Iran's nuclear program in its weakened state with its proxies effectively eroded.
The Supreme Court has unanimously agreed to give an Atlanta family whose home was raided by the FBI a new day in court. Agents pointed guns and set off a flashbang grenade, terrifying a 7-year-old before realizing they had the wrong house. CBS News Brief. I'm Deborah Rodriguez.
Breaking political news from the team that knows D.C.
A breaking story. Greg Storr, Bloomberg Supreme Court reporter with us.
Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines, along with D.C.'s most respected news team.
Nick Wadhams, leads our U.S. national security coverage at Bloomberg.
Balance of Power with Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines.
We welcome Gregory Cordy, Bloomberg Politics reporter.
Listen live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern, or on demand wherever you get your podcasts. Bloomberg Radio. Context changes everything.
Join us in Atlanta or via live stream on August 12th for Bloomberg's Business Value of AI event and networking reception. This event will gather business and technology executives to share their experiences and provide insight into how to best use data to optimize the customer experience. You'll also learn how companies have successfully implemented AI agents that have led to improved productivity and profitability. This program is proudly sponsored by IBM. Register at bloomberglive.com/AI/Atlanta.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. From design to manufacturing to maintenance to flight crew. It's way too early to say with any certainty exactly what caused a Boeing 787 in western India to crash shortly after takeoff. The downing of the plane carrying 242 souls is the worst accident to date involving Boeing's most advanced twin-aisle aircraft. And given Boeing's recent issues with safety in production, the market is sending its shares down 5%. President Trump's latest trade salvo, saying he plans to set unilateral tariffs on U.S. trading partners in 2 weeks, is pushing most Wall Street stocks into the loss column so far. But the indexes are split. Dow losing 0.1%, NASDAQ and S&P gaining 0.1%. Helping provide some counterweight to market sentiment is the latest on inflation. The day after the government's May Consumer Price Index showed retail inflation rising more slowly than forecast, the government says wholesale prices also rose less than predicted last month. 0.1 instead of a predicted 0.2%. Andrew O'Day, Bloomberg Radio.
Bloomberg Radio, on demand and in your podcast feed.
On the latest Masters in Business podcast, my conversation with Goldman Sachs Asset Management's Brian Lake on how he's transforming Goldman's investing business.
That's exactly right. You know, one of the quotes that we throw around a lot at that point is that if you didn't like change, you were going to like irrelevance even less, right? And if you think about that, that was what was going to happen. This innovation and this whole story is about innovation and continuing to look for new ideas. And, you know, as you think about how product gets developed, as you think about how distribution happens, these are all things that inform all of those things. But yeah, that was an amazing time. That then evolved into hey, we've got investors from Asia, from Europe, from South America that are buying our ETFs listed on the New York Stock Exchange because, by the way, it's a security. And so all these firms that had trading lines open in New York were happy to buy an ETF off the exchange in that way. Hey, Brian, would you mind getting on a plane and going and talking to some of these people and figure out what's going on in these areas?
So you go to Europe and the Middle East, you go to Asia. Eventually, after 12 years of work at Invesco PowerShares, you're running EAFE in terms of ETFs. Tell us about that experience.
That was an amazing thing. I had been doing this global business development. And so, you know, combine a couple of things that we've talked about here. So I had, you know, tens of thousands of conversations around ETFs. I had been given the fortunate opportunity to talk to incumbent asset managers and how they then are digesting ETFs in their portfolios and how that's going to change the industry and what's happening there. I had done that then globally, so you understand the overall ecosystem.
Hear the full conversation on the latest edition of the Masters in Business podcast. Subscribe on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Plus, listen anytime on the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com. Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is the Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. The major stock averages right now mixed a little change. Bond yields, they're pushing lower, the dollar falling. Oracle right now, the leading technology share for protecting cloud infrastructure sales are going to jump more than 17%. Also, the best performing stock in the S&P 500 shares up close to 14% right now. After the Air India crash, Boeing shares worst performing stock in the S&P 500. They are down 5%. And the maker of the engines on that aircraft, General Electric, those shares right now down 1.7%. The Treasury is selling $22 billion of 30-year bonds this afternoon. This auction comes as Double Line Capital's Jeffrey Gundlach warns the long bond has lost its haven status.
The long-term Treasury bond is not a legitimate flight to quality asset. It's not responding to lower interest rates. It's not really responding to an inflation rate, which is now 2.5%.
Gundlach telling Bloomberg a reckoning is coming. Surprisingly poor reception for last month's 20-year auction. That contributed to the bond sell-off that pushed 30-year rates as high as 5.15. Right now, the long bond is at 4.87. That's down about 4 basis points. S&P 500 up 16 points at 6,039 in the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up 25 points, and the NASDAQ 100 57 points higher. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Alex and Paul.
All right. Thanks so much, JT. Alex Steele here alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We bring you all the top news in business, economics, and finance through our lens of our Bloomberg Intelligence folks. They cover 2,000 companies in 130 industries all around the world. All right. Let's check in with one of the best technology analysts out there, Dan Ives, Global Head of Technology Research over at Wedbush Securities. He joins us now. So the latest is that Elon Musk has an apology tour now. Reportedly, he spoke to President Trump. He said he overdid it. He posted on social media. Does this calm down Tesla?
I mean, look, that was the overhang, right? I mean, you don't want a BFF to turn into an enemy, especially when they're in the Oval Office. And I think it was a smart move. I mean, obviously, hotheads, things got a little wild. But I continue to believe Trump and Musk will be friends again. And Trump's a supporter of Tesla when it comes to ultimately the autonomous vision. And that continues to be key around robotaxi.
Yeah, let's go to robotaxi, Dan. Can you tell us kind of the timing around it, the market opportunity around it, the competitive nature? What do we need to know about the robotaxi business?
Yeah, I mean, and that'll be late next week. It looks like when it's actually, going to launch, or and maybe potentially June 22nd. But Paul, this is in Austin. This is going to be a small launch, but it's the start of what's going to be 20, 25 cities around the country in terms of basically a Waymo-like vehicle that Tesla is going to be able to scale and scope that's going to be unmatched. I think it's going to start, obviously, in a more of a ring-fenced, small area in Austin. But this is the beginning. We believe it is worth $1 trillion to the story in terms of the autonomous vision. And I continue to view this as probably, not just one of the best AI plays out there, but probably the most undervalued AI relative to the technology I see at Tesla.
But aren't there better ways or less stressful ways to play AI where you don't have a key man risk overhang?
Yeah, and now, our view is it's the odds AI 30, right? It's in terms of the report. Yeah, this is the autonomous way. Akko's the nuclear way. The godfather of AI, Jensen NVIDIA on the semis. Hyperscalers, Palantir, obviously one of the best pure plays. There's different ways to play it, but in my view, you can't just play it on semis. Can't just play on software. You have to play the whole theme. And I think when it comes to autonomous, Tesla continues to be the best way to play it.
So broadening out a little bit, Dan, U.S.-China, we had some news come out from President Trump about maybe after the London negotiations between the U.S. and China on trade. Still, we're sitting there with, I don't know, on China, the best I can read is still 55% tariffs. That's still a big, big deal. How do tech companies like an Apple, how do they deal with that?
I think also investors are viewing this 55% is probably the start. I think there's a view that that's going to come down. I think that's how the market's reading it as more negotiations come out. And I think there's going to be a lot of loopholes and a lot of exceptions. I think when it comes to tech, they're going to have to play both sides of the fence in terms of pivoting like Apple to India. But when it comes to NVIDIA and Jensen, I think that's the next big thing everyone's waiting for. What does this mean in terms of export controls? And will NVIDIA in some way be able to sell into China instead of handing that business to Huawei on a silver platter?
So, Dan, what else are you looking at? Like, okay, so we got through all the earnings. We got through Oracle yesterday, right? We got through the Musk and Elon, the Musk and Trump disaster. What is next on your radar? What's going to be a catalyst for your industry?
To me, it's all about the use cases, expanding on enterprise, and that's key. The hyperscalers, the oracles, of course, the semi plays as well. You're going to be looking out for they're loosening on the export controls in NVIDIA, and that's important, especially around China. But I think the big thing is now the consumer piece that's going to play out from Meta to what I view as really autonomous to robotics. That's the golden goose is physical AI. I think autonomous and robotics are going to be probably the biggest theme within AI. So to me, investors continue to I think where they're wrong, they continue to be skeptical about AI. I don't think there's any skepticism out there. We spend all of our time traveling around the world. This is a fourth industrial revolution. It's why I believe we're going to be talking about NASDAQ 20,000, NASDAQ 25,000, and so on over the coming years.
So, Dan, when we think about AI, one of the question marks in your world, Dan, and the world that touches almost everybody out there, a couple billion people, is Apple. I'm wondering, is an acqui-hire, which is something Apple historically has not done, or at least in scale, I kind of feel, I'm probably like a lot of your clients, I feel like they're kind of missing the boat here, and I keep waiting for them to jump on here, and they don't seem to have been. What's your call there in Apple?
Look, you could call it a snooze fest, in terms of Monday. It was a little time warp back to 2018, right? So, right now they're in the right lane going 45 miles an hour. Every other big tech player is going 100 miles an hour left lane. It's my view, acquisitions are going to have to do, even though they historically haven't done it. But I think it was clear on Monday. We walked out of there for the first time coming out of Apple Park, kind of shrugged the shoulders.
Okay, sorry, I was getting distracted by your hat. So for those of you who are on radio, usually we're used to Dan's really loud colors and jackets and stuff.
That's being
but you
polite.
have a hat. What does it say? Epic.
Epic. Now, it could be used to describe Sweeney as epic or AI.
Back in the
you
day.
could use it in a few different ways.
Okay, that feels important as Dan Ives does stock analysis from a car, which,
Exactly. We've done it all. I remember doing it first with the BlackBerry, driving between meetings in like Minneapolis and stuff like that. That was way back in the day. Dan Ives, thanks for joining us. Appreciate getting a couple minutes of your time. Dan Ives, Global Head of Technology Research at Wedbush Securities. Of course, we all believe that Dan Ives peaked when he was a student at Penn State, Happy Valley.
No,
and
he's an ETF now. Named after
that's
him,
right. He has an
I mean,
ETF.
come on. Maybe that's his peak, though.
Exactly.
At the end of the day. In the markets, it really is about the dollar today, it feels, falling to its weakest level in about 3 years. But then you wonder, do you wind up getting analyst calls for equity markets being like, hey, that's actually good for company earnings?
Yeah, I know. And it's interesting because we haven't seen this. And some FX people we had on today said, don't worry about it. And a 9 or 10% pullback in the dollars, it happens. And maybe it's part of it's just selling off because one could argue it was overvalued coming into all the euphoria of the beginning of the year and the new presidency. So maybe this is healthy. And others are suggesting, no, this is structural. This is the market telling you something.
Well, that's what I was wondering. Like when you get cyclicality that then transforms into structural. And so does it mean that all of a sudden the dollar's toast? Well, no. But can the dollar sustainably then be down 10, 15%? And if that's the case, then what winds up happening to other markets, to earnings, to other FX? What does Japan wind up doing with that? What is it? Can the Europe capitalize on that? Does the Europe want a structurally higher euro?
I'm going over to Italy in the fall, and I got the euro 115 is crushing.
You remember when the euro was like, was it over 2 or was it the pound?
I can't remember.
But either way,
I still have Deutschmarks in my drawer, so who cares? Coming up, Nathan Dean, we're talking some policy stuff. This is Bloomberg.
The breaking news out of Washington is constant.
The U.S. and China have agreed to a trade plan.
The debate continues on President Trump's tax and spending cut bill.
And Bloomberg has the experts to bring you every angle.
Tyler Kendall is joining us outside the White House.
The friction of Trump's immigration policy.
Breaking political headlines from the team that knows D.C.
House Speaker Mike Johnson joins us now.
Listen on Apple CarPlay or Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. And always on Bloomberg Radio. Context changes everything.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute, a troubling trend in the latest look at unemployment. Increasingly, people who are out of work are staying out of work. Latest measure of repeat filers for jobless claims shows an increase last week to the highest level since late 2021. It adds to evidence that it's getting harder for people to find a new job. The number of new unemployment claims made last week held steady from the week before at just under 250,000. Wall Street indexes started lower today following the unemployment reading and fresh worry over Trump tariffs. But main indexes are higher now, although not by much. Dow gaining 0.1%, NASDAQ and S&P up 0.25%. Along with politics, business makes strange bedfellows. BioNTech, best known as Pfizer's partner in developing and making COVID vaccines, is now going to buy its COVID vaccine rival CureVac for $1.25 billion. After failing to get its COVID shot to market, CureVac turned to fighting cancer, just as BioNTech started looking for a post-COVID revenue stream. Andrew O'Day, Bloomberg Radio.
The stories that moved markets today.
Concerns about iPhone sales in China.
And the insight that will shape trading tomorrow.
Traders are waiting to hear from Fed Chair Jay Powell.
The Bloomberg Business Week Daily Podcast with Carol Massar and Tim Stenbeck.
Technology and consumer staples among the biggest winners.
The rally taking a bit of a breather.
Bloomberg Business Week Daily. Listen live weekday afternoons at 2 Eastern on Apple CarPlay or Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. And anywhere you get your podcasts. Bloomberg Radio. Context changes everything.
The business news of Australia is more important than ever. Australia is a leader in renewable energy and critical minerals, and its strong global ties and resilient economy make it a prosperous trading nation. I'm Rebecca Jones. Join me and my team of reporters every week for the Bloomberg Australia podcast. Get an insider's look into the biggest Australian stories, all in under 15 minutes. The Bloomberg Australia podcast. Listen on Apple CarPlay or Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Economics.
A slower inflationary environment is what we're seeing here.
Finance.
How do you frame the Magnificent Seven?
Investment.
We're seeing a market move here and yields higher.
Bloomberg Surveillance. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, and the names that shape the world's markets.
My conversation with Christine Lagarde.
Listen live weekday mornings at 7 Eastern on Apple CarPlay or Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Watch us on YouTube. Go to the Bloomberg podcast page and click on the live feed, or catch us on Bloomberg Originals. You're listening to Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Alex Steele, Paul Sweeney. We are live here in the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York. We are streaming live on YouTube as well. All right, I'm looking at some Bloomberg reporting here. President Donald Trump says he intended to send letters to trading partners in the next 1 to 2 weeks, setting unilateral tariff rates ahead of a July 9th deadline to reimpose higher duties on dozens of economies. So sending out letters, I'm not sure what that means, but I guess...
Dear sir or ma'am.
Exactly. To whom it may concern, we're raising your things. Nathan Dean, he knows this stuff because we pay him to know this stuff. Nathan Dean, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Policy Analyst. Nathan, just give us your latest kind of overview of where we are on these tariffs here, a little, I guess, context.
Yeah, what I would say is there's really two phrases we're saying at the moment. The first is uncertainty. And look, if you're in the markets, this isn't a new word. You know that uncertainty is the word for 2025. But I would also use the phrase status quo, because even though President Trump said yesterday that he's going to send those letters out, and for what it's worth, that's a much easier way than going to the Rose Garden and holding up a little card that says here what the new tariff rates. You know, I think what we're going to see is we saw some reporting from Bloomberg News just last night that President Trump was also talking about extending this. So I think the current idea here is that you're going to have a situation where you have President Trump going out there and making threats or making statements that raises headline risk, but subsequently you're also going to have this idea that we're just going to try and keep the status quo because we don't want to rock the markets. And so I think you are going to see some examples. I think President Trump may pick on a couple of countries or the European Union in particular to try and raise a renewed threat or a headline risk in order to spur negotiations. But I think for the next 3 to 6 months, the markets are going to face this status quo of a 10% baseline plus an extension or plus an exemption or plus a certain additional threshold like we saw with the China agreement. And that should probably stick through the third quarter.
Are these agreements, really, we're just looking at China and the UK, are they actually different, or are they just kind of circling back to where we were before all of this trauma unfolded here?
Well, so the China one is mostly status quo from where we were before, but the UK agreement was different because the United Kingdom didn't have a trade deficit with the United States like other certain countries do. So the base case scenario that you should be looking at is a 10% minimum tariff on every country. I mean, look, you know, we heard Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent say if they don't have any trade, tariffs on us, we're not going to have tariffs on them. But this idea of a 10% baseline is something that's usually sticking around at the White House. But then you're also going to see exemptions. For example, automobiles, technology, anybody that can get into the White House is going to be pushing for President Trump to offer exemptions. And we just go back to this idea that if you are going to see sectors that impact consumer prices, so think of things like Apple MacBooks or Amazon or, Walmart, like Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent was just getting pushed about in the Senate Finance Committee, then you are going to see exemptions, but then there are going to be additional, tariffs for other countries. But we should say that a lot of this depends on negotiations. Bloomberg News reported just 20 minutes ago that Prime Minister Mark Carney said the U.S.-Canada is going well. They reported last night that negotiations with India weren't going so well. So that idea for examples to be made before July 9th could come about.
Okay, I guess we just keep in touch with him.
I hear some skepticism from Paul at this moment.
It feels like we're going to get to a spot kind of where we did last time, which is at the end of the day, it's a lot about nothing. And I think the markets, certainly the equity markets, might be pricing that in with the rebound here. All right, Nathan, for the adults in the room here, what's the next thing from D.C. we should be focusing on here?
So the number one question we've been getting from our clients just this morning is when is the Senate Finance Committee going to release its legislation or its text President Trump's one big beautiful bill. So if you are an equity investor and you're exposed to the solar industry or the wind industry, this is very important to you because Senator Crapo just last night was saying that things like certain tax credits should be phased out earlier. And we think he was hitting at solar and wind, and others would be extended, which was nuclear and geothermal. Now, obviously, we're still waiting for that text. Now, I think that text is going to come after market close on Friday. I think it's going to come Saturday or Sunday, but keep your eyes out because there is this potential for some, I used to say marijuana stocks have hot sauce. Now I say the solar stocks, they have hot sauce. So these things move around. So definitely keep your eyes out for that. That's probably the next major catalyst you're going to see coming from Washington.
Is that is hot sauce reference is a good thing or a bad thing? Or just spicy? Just stuff happening?
Just spicy. I stole it from our friends over in the ETF space.
Okay, no, fair enough, because the solar sector is just really in a mess based on when the tax credits land when it comes out of the Senate. Do you think the timeline still works?
I do. I think, obviously the senators want to have all this legislation out in the public arena before Juneteenth next week. They're going away for a couple of days. And I think the Senate can eventually get there. They seem to be a little bit more, I'd say, on board. There were still major questions about the deficit, getting the Rand Pauls on the debt ceiling and, the other senators, Ron Johnson's, if you will, on board. But I think they can get there by the 4th of July or maybe even after the 4th of July. We still are thinking an 80% chance this gets done before the August recess.
All right. I mean, those recesses are actually a good incentive to get stuff
like
done.
Deadlines.
Yes. So it's good. All right, Nathan. Appreciate it as always. Nathan Dean, he is our go-to person in D.C. to explain all the craziness down there in terms of the policies. Nathan Dean, senior policy analyst, Bloomberg Intelligence. He's down in our D.C. bureau. And again, we're going to get some tariff discussions continuing. And it's all about the big, beautiful tax bill, or will it be something different coming out of the Senate when they send it back to the House? So a lot going on. For our listeners in the U.S., a reminder, you can listen to us via satellite radio on Sirius XM Channel 121. Access the world's only global audio business network, coast to coast, 24 hours a day. Bloomberg Radio on Sirius XM Channel 121 is presented by ShipStation. Stay with us. Your top stories and global business headlines are coming up right now. The market's showing a little bit of red, a little bit of green, not all direction in the equity markets. Yields coming in. This is Bloomberg.
Broadcasting 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Radio.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney.
The real outperformance has been the U.S. corporate high yield.
Are the companies lean enough? Have they trimmed all the fat?
One person's chaos is another person's animal spirits.
Breaking market headlines and corporate news from across the globe.
Do investors like the M&A that we've seen?
Are people just too exuberant out there?
The window between the peak and cut changing super fast.
Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals.
All right, happy Thursday, everybody. Happy Friday Eve. I'm Alex Steele alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We are covering all the top news for you within this hour. We're going to get the latest on Boeing and the Air India Boeing 787 crash after it took off in India. Sid Phillip will be joining us. He's Bloomberg Deputy Team Leader, working overtime there in London. Jake Silverman is Bloomberg Intelligence semi-analyst about Micron investing about $200 billion in U.S. chip manufacturing and R&D. I want to what's new? What's already planned and what's new in that? Max Wasserman is co-founder and senior portfolio manager at Miramar Capital. We'll get his take on the markets. And Jason Kelly, Bloomberg Originals chief correspondent. He has the latest episode of The Deal with Alex Rodriguez. And this title?
Yep.
Magic Johnson.
That's going to be awesome.
Oh, yeah. We will definitely get to that. But let's kick it all off right now with the Bloomberg Business Flash. And for that, we go to John Tucker.
All right. Right now, the major stock averages, they are, we'll call it mixed. We had data this morning. Inflation muted in May. The producer price index rising just 0.1% from the month earlier. So this could give the Federal Reserve room to lower interest rates. But Gennady Goldberg at TD Securities says, you know what, investors really can't take any solace from the recent data.
Are we done here? Can we just all move on? Or is this really just the eye of the hurricane and there's a lot more coming? I'm more in the latter camp. I do think there's more pressure coming. There's a lot more coming on the inflation side. Almost certainly. We are looking for high threes by the end of the year.
And there is coming a 30-year auction today. Ahead of that, the long bond down 4 basis points right now at 487. The major stock averages, the S&P 500 18 points higher, up 0.3%, 6,041 on the index. The Dow unchanged, and the Nasdaq 100 80 points higher. That is up 0.4%. Oracle was at a record best performing stock of the S&P 500, also leading gains in technology shares. They said cloud infrastructure sales gonna soar. Boeing, again, that is the worst performer in the S&P 500 after the Air India crash. Meantime, the difference between expected returns on stocks and U.S. Treasuries hovering around its lowest point since 2002. We check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Alex and Paul.
All right, John Tucker, thank you so much. We appreciate that. John gave you the index overview. Let's take a look at some of the stocks on the move today. I'm Paul Sweeney along with Alex Steele, and we're joined by Bloomberg's Denitsa Sakova. Denitsa, what are you looking at this morning?
Let's start with a quick check on Boeing. Obviously, it's coming off the devastating news of the crash with the plane heading to London from India. The stock is down about 6% today. Along with that, we're seeing General Electric, we're seeing Spirit Aerosystems, we're seeing a lot of those avio companies suffering devastating crash. More than 200 people have been found dead, and obviously we're getting more and more developments on that. It's raising a lot of questions about the safety of civil aviation. We know the 2024 was a pretty bad year. 2025 had a rough start. There were more and more questions about Boeing, and it's clearly those questions are coming back. The motor was from General Electric, so those stocks are also seeing pressure. So devastating story, and indeed raising a lot of questions going forward for civil aviation.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, what else are you looking at?
We're looking at GameStop as well. The stock tumbled more than 19%. It's about 20% now. If we look year to date, it's down 27%. Pretty rough start of the year. They're implementing that strategy, stone-firm strategy from Michael Saylor, and they're planning to offer about 1.75 billion worth of convertible bonds. They made a lot of changes in March, and it seems like this hasn't reflected that much on their share price. They updated the policy to allow executive and directors to promise securities as collateral. They also allowed in their investment policy to invest Treasury Reserve assets in Bitcoin. So those two big changes were supposed to help the company, but clearly investors are not reacting well to that big loss year to date. Of course, this is a retail favorite, so things move very fast and fortunes change. But so far, the news today are not taken well by investors.
All right, anything else?
We have BioNTech buying CureVac. That's a very interesting one where the two companies have been rivals for many years. And now BioNTech is buying it for 1.25 billion, all stock transaction. So BioNTech won the race with Pfizer when it comes to becoming one of the leading biotechs in Europe. CureVac shot never made it to the market, actually, but they have pivoted away from infection diseases work, focusing instead on cancer immunotherapies. So that acquisition is adding to BioNTech effort in that. The stock is up just over 1% today, but year to date, pretty strong gain of 6%. So some good news for vaccine makers.
All right. Thanks so much, Denitsa. Really appreciate Denitsa Sakova joining us from Bloomberg. For more conversations just like this, subscribe to our new Stock Movers reports. Listen for 5-minute audio reports on the biggest winners and losers in the stock market. Subscribe to Stock Movers on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen. Let's dig in a little bit more what Denitsa was just talking about when it comes to Boeing. So the Boeing 787 Dreamliner that was operated by Air India crashed shortly after taking off in India, killing all 242 people on board. Joining us now is Sid Phillip, Bloomberg Deputy Team Leader for Global Aviation. I said he was in London, but he's not. He's in Paris. I should have known from the Eiffel Tower that's behind him for those of you on radio. Sid, this is all right before the Paris Air Show, right? What are you hearing on the ground?
Thanks, Alex. So at the moment, we don't really have details on what really went wrong with the aircraft and what caused it to crash. I mean, it reached an altitude of 625 feet, and then it sort of just plummeted to the ground in a massive fireball. And we know that over 200 people have been pulled out dead. There has been some mention of survivors. We don't really know how many. The police said that survivors have been taken to hospital. We're not quite sure whether those survivors are from the aircraft or whether they're from the residential building. So the plane crashed into a residential building. It was a medical college hostel, and that's where students and doctors were eating lunch when the plane crashed. So it was a massive tragedy for for Air India, for India, and obviously it's raised lots of questions on Boeing, and we're still waiting to see what those answers actually are to those questions as to what caused it and where do we go from here?
So typically, who leads these investigations here? Is it the host country? Is it the airline? How does that work?
Yes, so the investigation will be led by investigators from India. So typically when a plane crashes, the country where the plane crashed leads the investigation into what went wrong. The other countries that we have FAA input, we have NTSB input, we have input from the manufacturer, in this case Boeing, and also from GE because they made the engine. So there will be input from others. And we've also seen the UK Air Air Accident Investigation Board talking that they will be sending some investigators to India tomorrow. So it'll be a multinational effort in terms of trying to find out what went wrong, and then they will determine where the problem came up from and what really caused this crash.
We are seeing Boeing shares down, obviously looking at GE because they were using GE engines. Are those market reactions, investors' reactions, legitimate, considering how much unknowns there are, how hard it is to fly planes, and the variables like birds?
It's difficult to actually put input this onto Boeing or GE because, this aircraft has been in service for over 11 years, almost 12 years. So it's not a brand new aircraft that's just come fresh off the line from Boeing. So, it is far-fetched to pin the blame on Boeing without ascertaining the causes of what happened and what went wrong. Obviously the investigation will determine what went wrong and who was at fault, and if there was pilot error, if there was any technical issue, if there was something wrong with the plane or with the engines. But it's all still too early to determine the cause of it. And so it does seem to be an initial reaction, and we will get more clarity on what really went wrong in the days and months ahead as we as the investigators pour through the flight data recorders, the cockpit voice recorders, and piece together minute by minute, second by second, what really went wrong.
All right, Sid, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your reporting. Siddharth Philip, Deputy Team Leader for Global Aviation, Bloomberg News. He is based in London, but he's reporting from our Paris bureau today. Let's switch gears, get back to technology. One of the big stories in the tech space today, Micron, to invest about $200 billion in U.S. chip manufacturing and R&D. To break it all down for us, Jake Silverman joins us here from Jake Silverman from Bloomberg Intelligence joins us. Jake, how big of a deal? $200 billion, that gets my attention. It seems like a big number. Is this part of this onshoring, reshoring commitments that we're seeing across a lot of different companies and industries? Is that what's happening here with Micron?
Yeah, I would liken it to that. We've seen pretty high-profile announcements from companies like TSMC, Apple, Global Foundries. And so Micron's already committed to spending a lot in the United States, and this is just a continuation and extension of that.
So what's the new spend and what's previously announced spend?
So it seems like there's a few numbers kind of thrown around there. It seems like there's an additional $30 billion. A lot of that, I believe, is in R&D, but I've seen $125 billion beforehand. But regardless of the fact, it was $100 billion plus now, at least $200 billion over likely what amounts to be several decades.
So in reality, how does the industry view building chips here? Like historically, what chips were built here or created here and what were fabbed outside of the U.S.?
Yeah, so just to keep it Micron specific, as we already know, right, you have Intel in the United States, mostly, supplying to themselves, and TSMC being kind of the world's foundry of global foundries with their fab, and a lot of internal fabs across the United States. But Micron specifically, the vast majority of their capacity comes from Taiwan and slightly lesser extent, Japan. And so this is really is a bit of a shift in terms of their strategy, but something, as we just talked about, has been a plan for several years now.
How much does Micron usually spend in CapEx a year? And would this be comparable?
Well, it's a little bit difficult to determine exactly because we don't know the timeline, like the exact how much they're going to spend per year. But
typically, what do they normally and what have they been spending?
Yeah, no, they're planning this year to spend, between I think roughly $15 billion in terms of fiscal year. I have to double check my numbers, but that would sound like a number that would, over the course of several decades, we'd expect them to spend, plus R&D as well.
Where are we going to be building these plants? Have the companies kind of disclose where they're going to be building all this stuff?
Yeah, so the plants are already announced in Idaho, Boise, Idaho, and Clay, New York. So there's going to be several.
Clay, New York?
Yeah, it's in upstate New York. There's several facilities within these. There's several fabs within these facilities.
Where does Micron sort of play in the AI world right now?
Yeah, so they're kind of specialized. So obviously you have your GPUs, you have your hyperscaler ASICs, and each of those chips tends to require HBM, high bandwidth memory. And so these are this is memory that's stacked on top of each other and then packaged on the same substrate as the GPUs. And so it's a pretty important part of that because you can't really have a lot of these chips. If you think about Blackwell for NVIDIA, before that Hopper, Google's TPU, Amazon's Trainium, I could keep going on, but all of them require HBM. There's other options that don't require HBM, but regardless, you're going to have to use high bandwidth memory for planning to build out these large scale AI data centers.
Clay, New York, just north of Syracuse. Next door to Clay, New York, and Cicero, Cracker Barrel Old Country Store. So the engineers will be well fed there at the fab in Clay, New York. So yeah, I'm sure that's a good spot to be there, right in upstate New York. So Jake, give us a sense, just where are we in the cycle for semis here? Is the semi space being driven by the AI spend in the global tech stack, or what's driving it?
Yeah, I mean, AI has continued to be a secular driver for the entire industry as a whole. We've seen a little bit, one of the bigger contributors to semiconductor demand is smartphones. I think with trade-related, potential headwinds, that could be a problem there. But overall, smartphones, PCs have been relatively healthy, trade aside, tariffs aside. But we're starting to see also a return of demand for industrial. Automotive is a little less clear, but you still have things like ADAS, and you still have infotainment, connectivity. Those are continuing to be drivers within automotive. So it's a little bit mixed, I would say, overall in terms of like different sector to sector semiconductor spend. But generally speaking, I think we're at a somewhat more healthy levels right now in terms of demand.
Okay, so here's my update. I need to buy a laptop. I have not bought a laptop in like 20 years. What do I buy? I was looking on Best Buy, right?
Is this a consumer segment for you?
Well, yes,
this is Alex's concern.
But this will go back to the chip thing because I'm going through the list and it's like blah blah chip with the thing and the process and the 200 and the Mac 2 and this. And I'm like, I don't know what any of this means. What is the better chip? What has AI? What doesn't? What am I supposed to do?
So PCs are not my area of expertise.
But you can play it on radio. It's fine.
I will say, there's a push for a lot of like AI PCs right now. I think there's a case to be made that enterprises need that. I think for consumers, there's a question mark of, can you just rely on applications like ChatGPT if you want to get AI? But generally speaking, it kind of depends what you want to use it for. I would assume that
your emails and stuff.
I don't know.
Just get the Ray-Ban glasses.
Are you streaming gaming?
I
don't know.
I'm definitely
Are you
not
streaming on
streaming
Twitch?
gaming.
Yeah, so you
No.
probably don't need anything that's like a particularly.
Are you an Apple person?
I have an iPhone. That's all I got.
Just get the Mac Air, whatever those things
You don't know. I'm not. What do you know?
Laptop. You're getting a laptop, right? Yeah.
Mac Air?
Get a cool one that just looks cool.
Yeah, see? This is why I asked the professional.
Send your suggestions to Alex Steele, care of Bloomberg.
That's right. A-Steele6 at Bloomberg.net. Thanks a lot. All right, Jake, thanks a lot. We really appreciate it. Jake Silverman joining us from Bloomberg Intelligence. He's helping me find a computer and, more importantly, also talking about Micron and the investment in the U.S. All right, let's take a look at where we are within the markets. I got to be honest. If you were to tell me that the narrative was disinflation and you would have had initial jobless claims, continuing claims rising more than we thought, I would have thought that would have been good news for risk assets because that would increase the probability that maybe the Fed could cut sooner rather than later. And it doesn't feel like we're seeing that narrative unfold. And I'm wondering why.
Well, I think it still may be the conversation we had about policy coming out of Washington, D.C. There's still tariffs. We feel like we're moving in the right direction, i.e. getting away from the worst case scenario.
Right.
It feels like the tax bill is winding its way through Congress, but there's still a lot of uncertainty around those two things. And It's a Friday, Thursday. And it's a Thursday in summer.
He wishes it was a Friday.
Yeah.
But this is also my question, too. We just kind of removing worst case scenarios, but that's different than having clarity. And who's really, is it the Fed or is it policy from D.C.? Like, which one is going to really be in charge? This is Bloomberg Intelligence.
The Fed's top names are on Bloomberg Radio. Minneapolis Fed President Neil Kashkari.
There's no question that the shock of tariffs are stagflationary.
Atlanta Fed President Raphael Bostic.
Right now, I would say in my SCP, I have one cut only for this year.
Richmond Fed President Thomas Barkin.
The surge in optimism anticipating pro-business policies after the election has backed off.
For the latest headlines from the Fed, listen on Bloomberg Radio or anytime on the Bloomberg Talks podcast.
Bloomberg Surveillance is your premier destination for the latest on global financial markets. And now we're live on YouTube. I'm Lisa Mateo.
And I'm Tom Keene. Join me, Lisa, Paul Sweeney, and Michael Barr weekday mornings.
Visit the Bloomberg podcast page on YouTube to hear and see the most influential voices on global markets.
The smart way to start your day is with Bloomberg Surveillance weekdays, 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern.
Visit the Bloomberg podcast page on YouTube and click on the live feed to join us today.
The more you listen to your kids, the closer you'll be. So we asked kids, what do you want your parents to hear?
I feel sometimes that I'm not listened to. I would just want you to listen to me more often and evaluate situations with me and lead me towards success.
Listening is a form of love. Find resources to help you support your kids and their emotional well-being at sounditouttogether.org. That's sounditouttogether.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council and Pivotal.
Bloomberg Radio, on demand and in your podcast feed.
On the latest edition of the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast, Francis Donald, RBC Capital Markets.
Well, there's all sorts of measures of uncertainty, and no surprising, whatever measure you're using is at an all-time high. And what that means for forecasters, but also for businesses, my clients, the CEOs that I talk to all the time. What do you hear from them? What I hear is we have to risk manage around downside and upside. We can't have one scenario that we base our business operations on. We have to plan and prepare for a wide range. But this uncertainty, it is not actual policy that is problematic here. Although, yes, there are some elements of it that are problematic. It's what is the game that we're playing. We cannot write the playbook until we know what the game is itself. And so forecasters and businesses are actually operating with much wider set of scenarios available to them.
So you go into 245 Ouellette Avenue. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
I'm not sure.
I think I'm close. Windsor, Ontario?
Windsor, Ontario, yeah.
I think it's sort of like Edge of French, but it's in Ontario. I don't know. I'm lost. RBC branch in Ouellette in Windsor, Ontario. What's the confidence there to invest? I don't see it.
Interesting you chose Windsor. Windsor has one of the highest unemployment rates in the entire country in Canada. It's at 11%. 11% unemployment rate. But then if you were to head to the beautiful island of Victoria, BC, you would find that the unemployment rate is 3%. What is this? This is what tariffs do, and it's happening in America as well, which is that you're going to have sectors within the global economy, the U.S. economy, the Canadian economy that are operating in very real, I'll go back on my recession, no recession comment, very real recessions.
Hear the full conversation on the latest edition of the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Subscribe on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Plus, listen anytime on the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash being brought to you by Oracle. Attention growing businesses. Oracle offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. It's for new U.S. customers with minimum financial commitments. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/Bloomberg. Is this a conflict of interest? The S&P 500 bouncing as Oracle is leading the tech gains, actually soaring to a record. They are projecting dramatically higher sales. Again, the S&P 500 is higher as a result of that. Right now, 10 points higher, up 0.2%. We're at 6,032 on the index. If you're keeping score at home, the S&P 500 trading less than 2% away from its record close. Dow Jones Industrial Average, that is down 36 points. The NASDAQ 100, 35 points higher. That's up about 0.2%. And we have more evidence of inflation extending a week-long drop in bond yields. And that's your flash, Alex and Paul.
All right, John Tucker, thank you so much right now. Let's go to Bloomberg Television right now. We have an interview in progress. Chris Britt, co-founder and CEO of fintech company Chime, is speaking with Bloomberg Television anchors Ed Ludlow and Caroline Hyde.
Fluctuation of the stock, even if it goes up today, I'm sure there's going to be other days that won't be as great. So we remain focused on the long term, and that is being a company that's member obsessed and focused on solving the most important needs of everyday consumers that we serve. So I think today's going to be a pretty exciting day.
You've got 8 million plus of those consumers, Chris. How do you increase your own revenue in the scale of the business? Is it more products serving them? Is it more people coming in?
Yeah, we see multiple ways to grow. First of all, in Q1, we grew our active member base by over 23%. So that's increasing year over year. And at the same time, we continue to look for opportunities to offer new products that drive product attach and lead to more primary account engagement. At Chime, 2/3 of our members use us as their primary bank account. So they rely on us for their everyday transactions. And we love to, as a technology company, we monetize the relationships really through a payments-driven business model, which is very different than the way traditional banks go to market.
Chris, we love to read the risk factors section of the prospectus. I do it all the time. How real are those risk factors for you, specifically on interchange fees and how you're thinking about it?
Oh, we, I guess, I'm sure there's lots of risks that the attorneys put into the prospectus. We get questions about interchange all the time. We really like this model of relying primarily on payments-driven revenue. That's about 72% of our revenue comes from payments. And what we like about it is it's aligned with the best interests of our members. We have to earn our position as the top of wallet card every day, and we do it to the tune of about, our average customer does about 54 transactions a month. So they're incredibly engaged. And when you couple that with the digital-first, low-cost structure, that allows us to develop very healthy, profitable relationships with this interchange-driven business model. The reality is that our model has allowed us to offer fee-free banking to millions of consumers who otherwise would be paying hundreds of dollars a year to have a bank account.
You're able to be cheaper because of AI. I'm interested quickly, though, regulatory risk that those interchange fees go smaller, particularly if you become bigger.
Well, we have a balanced set of revenue in the payments area. We have a debit card payments volume. We also have a secured credit card that's actually growing at a faster clip than debit. So we think we're very well balanced, and given the love and engagement we have, there's no shortage of opportunities for us to offer new products and services over time.
All right, Chris Britt, Chime CEO. We're waiting for the start of trade, but indicating a big jump at the open. Thank you very much for joining us on Bloomberg Tech. All right, coming up, we're actually going to go back in history a little bit and speak to one of...
Okay, right now that was Chris Britt, co-founder and CEO of Chime, is speaking with BT anchors Ed Ludlow and Caroline Hyde. So that was interesting. Chime has not opened yet. As IPO'd at price last night, has not opened yet. Again, back in the day when I was doing these things, we had these babies open at 10, 10:30, no later.
No more. You're thinking 1. Like now we're looking 1 at best.
No, and then they had anchor investors. We never had that. We just kind of made a bunch of phone calls and we got it out the door. All right, let's switch gears to something really cool. And Chime is really cool, too, for a lot of folks that are on to that fintech stuff. Jason Kelly joins us here, Bloomberg Originals chief correspondent. You and Alex Rodriguez, the deal with Alex Rodriguez and Jason Kelly. Man, you guys got a good one coming up.
Their sound.
Oh, their
We have sound. You can hear a preview because
here we go.
Basketball legend Magic Johnson broke down how he was able to make the transition from being a legendary basketball player to a successful businessman. And Jason Kelly and Alex Rodriguez sat down with him on the latest episode of The Deal.
The hardest thing I thought I was going to do was play against Larry Bird and Michael Jordan. The hardest thing was to go before the board and then go into a movie theater packed with good shareholders and try to convince them this is a great move for Starbucks. And sure enough, I was able to do that, and they all signed off. And I became the first person to ever own Starbucks outside of Starbucks. We built 125 in 40 different markets across America. They all did extremely well. And that really gave me, first of all, the stamp of approval. It gave me the track record that I needed of success so I can move on to something else.
That was basketball legend Magic Johnson speaking with Jason Kelly and Alex Rodriguez for their next episode of The Deal. Now, he's so famous, even I know who he is. I don't have to stretch far now for this conversation. So what else do you guys talk about?
Magic is one of one. As you guys know, he was one of one on the court. And interestingly enough, he really has become one of one in the business world. He really set the template. One of the things we talked about in a very personal way is that there is no Alex Rodriguez as we know him today without Magic Johnson. And Alex tells this amazing story in the episode about how he reached out to Magic, sort of through some intermediaries, wanted half an hour turned into 3 hours. And Magic very generously just said, here's the playbook. Here's what you need to do to make, to your exact point, Alex, the transition to being a successful businessman. And, you fast forward, Alex is an owner of an NBA and WNBA teams. He has a huge real estate portfolio. He's, got this diverse set of investments across venture capital and tech and all of these things. And Magic really taught him how to do it.
Wow, that's amazing.
So I've been following Magic, like most people my age, since the beginning. Can you just summarize kind of what he is doing in business these days? He mentioned that example of Starbucks, but he has such a vast array of holdings. What's he focused on?
Yeah, so really what he's focused on now, Paul, is ownership. Okay. And he has been for a long time, but really ownership in sports. And so, you heard that little clip about the Starbucks deal, and I encourage people to listen to the show because he goes really into how he got to Howard Schultz initially, what the pitch was to Howard Schultz. Then, you heard him talk about presenting to the shareholders. That was a seminal deal for him. What he said to us is the greatest deal he's done to date is actually his recent minority ownership in the Washington Commanders. Yep. He's part of that deal with Josh Harris and Mark Ein, David Blitzer, and others. But, Magic was the guy, and I think Josh Harris, who we've also had on the show, would validate this. Magic really leveled it up. And it's a huge moment to have, a former athlete, and I'm speaking about things that Magic spoke about, a former athlete and a man of color in such a prominent position in, as you know, from following media and sports for so long, Paul. Sorry, Alex. And, the NFL is the juggernaut. Yep. Like that is the holy grail in terms of, owning a sports franchise. Wow.
So what was hard? Did you talk about what it was hard to make that transition? Like he clearly obviously came with brand recognition, but.
So yes, it was. I think when you're an athlete, sometimes it's hard to be taken seriously.
Exactly. Yeah.
He definitely faced that. He faced questions even as he was trying to do the Starbucks deal because his whole pitch was, you need to bring Starbucks into the urban core. And, a lot of people at Starbucks are like, we're good with the burbs, bro. And he was like, no. I have the proof from Magic Johnson Theaters, which he had created early on.
That's right.
This is a market. It's going to explode in the best possible way in terms of demand. And nobody's there. You need to be there. And it turned out to be huge. How
long did it take for him to convince them?
About a year. And it starts literally with him meeting Howard Schultz after a game. He walks across the court when the Lakers are playing the then Seattle Supersonics and basically starts to make the pitch. The other really difficult thing he talked about was making the transition from investing his own money to investing other people's money. And he goes to CalPERS and makes the pitch and essentially says, I know how to do this. Like, I know how to invest in these markets that you want and need access to. And he said he went up and back and up and back from LA to Sacramento over and over again until he finally got the money. He got a little bit, that turned into a lot. And, you guys know how this works. Guess what? They gave him more and he kept investing. So it's an amazing story.
I'm a Wall Street guy, so I got to ask these questions. What's the estimate of his net worth?
He's somewhere between $1 and $1.5 billion at this point. I mean, wow. So he's in very rare air in terms of former athletes, current and former athletes who have, have that be after their name. That number is growing really fast. You guys talk in the show, we talk all the time on our show about the value of sports franchises, how much they're going up. you think about there are going to be some transactions coming in the NFL in the next few months that are going to make $6.05 billion for the Commanders look like an absolute steal. And so, the current value of that deal alone has probably gone up 50 to maybe even 100% for him already.
But what's so amazing about what he did with Starbucks is that had nothing to do with sports.
Nope.
Like that's what was so fascinating, because then of course you're like, oh, okay, that's still in your wheelhouse, it's still in your zeitgeist, but that was totally different, and that's what makes it so amazing.
Totally. And what's interesting is that he, in a sort of strange way, he had to go prove himself there before he came back to sports as an owner, and that's exactly what A-Rod did. And it was interesting in the interview, you'll hear it. I asked him what his greatest deal was. He said the Commanders, and then he tells a great story about how he got involved in that. And then Alex follows up and says, "What was your best non-sports deal?" And so, and that's when he talked about Starbucks, because that's what's on Alex's mind, and it's part of what makes the show so interesting. I dare say, is that Alex is coming from this perspective. He can compare notes with former athletes, but what he really wants to learn is business. And so when he's sitting with a Josh Harris or a David Blitzer or a Magic Johnson, he wants the business playbook. He knows how to be successful on the field.
That's why he's sticking with Jason, man. That's why it's a good team. Not that you're not awesome in sports, but
All right, so Jason, thank you very much. We appreciate it. So check that out. Jason, give us your pitch on that real quick.
Yeah, so the deal, it's a weekly show, and you're going to go somewhere else.
Yeah, we're going to go somewhere else. All right, Jason, thanks so much. Right now, let's go down to Washington, D.C. President Trump is making some comments.
He's the man. I get nervous when I talk to him. He's doing a great job. Nuclear, I say, okay, you can take 2 weeks for that approval. It used to take 20 years, then they wouldn't approve it. Now I say, Lee, nuclear, I'll give you 2 weeks for an approval. A coal-fired plant, you only get a couple of days. And oil and gas will give you a week, okay? Something like that. But he's doing it so fast, and we have so many plants being built right now. It's so beautiful to see. And one of the reasons they're coming here is because they have to produce tremendous, especially the AI, they have to produce beyond believable amounts of electricity. And they're doing, I said to them, I think this was more or less my idea. They didn't have the idea only because they didn't think a thing like this was possible. I said, as you build your plant, you're going to become a utility. And you're going to build a separate plant right alongside of it. You're going to build it. You're going to build a plant that produces electricity. And you'll produce it through natural gas, coal, nuclear. We don't want to produce it through wind because we don't feel like ruining 50 miles of beautiful plains and beautiful vistas. And but we want to produce it. Interestingly, China is opening up a coal plant every single week. But now I'm finding out it might be 2 plants every single week. And, usually that's a good gauge. If they're using coal, I guess we're supposed to use coal. And, we went to a coal standard. And not that you have to use coal. You're going to use whatever's best. I want to introduce also Senate Majority Whip John Barrasso, who's a tremendous guy, doctor. Okay? And he is a tremendous guy, tremendously talented doctor. When I have a medical situation for the country, for myself, I haven't used them, but I might have to. Maybe I'll do that. If it's serious enough, I think I'd probably do that. But he's a tremendously talented gentleman who happens to be a senator and one that's very respected. Chairwoman Shelley Moore Capito, and congratulations. I just endorsed your son. Did you know that? I endorsed your son. I endorsed your son, who's running in West Virginia, and he's great. In fact, he's all Trump all the time. I think much more so than you, actually. If you want. You were his largest impediment. No, I'm only kidding. He's all Trump all the time, and he's going to win big, and so congratulate him, okay? He's really been fantastic. So many people have told me. Thank you. And House Majority Leader Steve Scalise, who's a brave man who went through hell. Steve went through hell. And we have a lot of other people here that I won't be able to because they don't have your name down, and I'm looking, and I see people's names. I'll do a couple of you, but thanks as well to Mark Wayne Mullen, Senator. Mark Wayne, thank you. Stand up, Mark Wayne. Don't fight him. He's a serious fighter in a lot of ways, and he's a great guy, too. Thank you, Mark Wayne. Deb Fisher. Deb? Thank you, Deb. Good. Pete Ricketts, who's going to do very well in the upcoming election. Thank you. Thank you, Pete. John Husted, who's really moving along in Ohio. John, good luck. You're going to do well. All endorsed people. John Curtis, who's doing terrifically. John, thank you. Good job. They all say excellent. What can I tell you? Good job. And Bernie Moreno, who won a race that was not winnable. They all said it's not winnable. He won in Ohio. They said, you can't win that race. It's a waste of time. You're just wasting your time. Right, Bernie? Wasn't a waste of time, was it? Huh? And he won by like 5 points, too. Won by a lot. Along with Representatives Kevin Kiley, Vince Fong, Jay Obernolte, Doug LaMalfa, Daryl Issa. Where's Daryl? I haven't seen you in such a long time. Look at you. How good you look, huh? Good when you have those big margins. It's easier to look. John Joyce, great guy. John, thank you. Thank you, John. Dusty Johnson, Morgan Griffith, Troy Balderson, Troy from a place called Ohio, and he played very cute at one time, but then he got, boy, I'll tell you, he's become a good politician. Where is Troy now? Where I haven't seen him used for years. I endorsed you early when he was early and younger, but you still look young, and you've done fantastically good. Good work, really good work. Claudia Tenney, New York. Claudia, thank you, Claudia. John James, John James. I don't know. You know, he's running for governor, but I'm not sure I'm happy about that, John. Do we have somebody good to take your seat? Because otherwise we're not letting him run for governor. We can't. You have somebody good, right? Okay, as long as you like him, they'll win. Tracy Mann. Tracy, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Michael Baumgartner. Michael. Thank you, Michael. Good job. David Rouser. Thank you. Glenn Grothman. Hi, Glenn. Thank you very much, Glenn. Brett Guthrie. Brett. Thank you, Brett. Rudy Yackham. Thank you. Thank you, Rudy. And I want to thank you all. And there's some additional people in the room, but we have to get back to this. Is like so big. This is a big one. Under the previous administration, I could go point after point, everything they did, open borders, men playing in women's sports, transgender for everybody, let's go transgender. What a group of people you had over there. They must have hated our country. Under the previous administration, the federal government gave left-wing radicals in California dictatorial powers to control the future of the entire car industry all over the country, all over the world, actually. Because they have to build a car. They can't build 19 different cars called the same thing. And really, it was all over the world what was happening. They approved Governor Gavin Newsom's ridiculous plan to impose a 100% ban on all new gas-powered cars within a very short period of time. Think of this. You couldn't buy any other car except an electric-powered car. And in California, they have blackouts and brownouts. They don't have enough electricity right now to do the job. And countrywide, you'd have to spend $4 trillion to build the firing plants, to be able to, they call it a firing, they call them a lot of things, charging plants, firing plants. $4 trillion you'd have to spend. In the Midwest, they built 9 of them. 9 individual, it's like a pump, just like a pump, except instead of gas, electricity comes out. They built 8 of them. $9 billion they spent for 8 little hoses, $9 billion. Now, I'm sure they could have done it for about, 1/1000th of that, but even if they did, it's unaffordable. They approved Governor Gavin's ridiculous is so ridiculous. By the way, you would, if I didn't bring the military in.
All right, that was President Trump in Washington, D.C., in the White House, making some comments there. Right now, we're going to reset here, and we'll go to Mr. John Tucker and get a Bloomberg Business Flash. John, what do you have for us?
All right, the major stock averages right now still mixed. S&P 500 10 points higher. That's up 0.2%. The Dow 38 points lower. NASDAQ 100 up 41 points. That's a rise of 0.2%. Boeing shares worst performing stock in the S&P 500 after the Air India crash. Those shares down right now just over 5%. Best performer, Oracle. Oracle shares reaching a record high. The company projecting a 70% gain in cloud infrastructure sales this fiscal year, driven by its focus on AI work and cloud computing. More tame inflation data today, but Adam Posen at the Peterson Institute, he's not expecting anything from the Federal Reserve anytime soon.
We're not falling off a cliff in terms of unemployment or growth. So anyway, forecast, they're going to sit tight. And they're going to sit tight at least through September, probably till fourth quarter.
And we do have the long bond auction. That is at 1 o'clock, looking for signs of take-up or maybe investors skipping that today. What are the insiders doing? Corporate executives selling shares at the fastest rate since November, with 778 selling their shares, 200 buying through June 11th. Some of the latest data there. We check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Alex and Paul.
All right. Thanks so much, John Tucker. Alex Steele here alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We bring you all the top news in business, economics, and finance through our lens of our Bloomberg Intelligence folks. Just an update here. President Trump is speaking at the White House. He will at some point be answering some questions in a wide-ranging speech. He's talking about EVs, chargers being too expensive, changing the laws potentially in California about cars. He's also touting coal, natural gas, as well as nuclear energy. On the flip side, you are seeing oil, which he says he didn't like, on the upswing here. You're looking at WTI up 68. You're looking at Brent almost at 70, at 69. The reason, though, is pretty scary, and that is heightened tensions within the Middle East. A recent report from ABC saying that Israel is mulling military action against Iran in a couple days. Mike McGlone is Bloomberg Intelligence senior commodity strategist, and he joins us now. When we take a look at sort of the worst case scenario, it would be the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, where you have, like a third or more of oil flows through. What would be the price impact of something like that?
Well, we've seen the most widely used numbers around $100 a barrel, but you mentioned the worst case scenario. It's never happened. The Strait of Hormuz has never been closed. So I love the threats, but even if Iran does try to close it, it's basically suicidal. It would cease to exist. And if we did have that kind of pump, it would be a global recessionary trajectory. The world's already seen pretty significant downtrends in GDP and demand pull growth, and most notably for crude oil demand, and supply increasing. So if that happened, it would just incentivize that tilt towards a global recession, and then crude oil eventually getting much cheaper later. So right now, it's just a classic bear market rally, and it found an excuse. All markets, bear markets, find an excuse. It's a question of how it goes. So I'll end with this. The 200-day moving average of WTI crude oil is around $70 a barrel, and it's still heading lower, and we're below that. It's quite the bear market.
So, Mike, as we think about just supply here, what I guess is different now versus 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, as we think about supply constraints, perhaps in the Middle East, is the U.S. is now a net exporter. So that changes the calculus a little bit, doesn't it?
That's been the main pressure factor on commodities overall, most notably crude oil, for about 15 years, Paul. You nailed it. It's that excess of supply coming out of the U.S., declining demand, the absolute need to export. And you can look at OPEC. Their part of global production is less than a third now. 20 years ago, it was about 40%. So they're declining, becoming less relevant. And my EV is 11 years old. So it's significantly a downward trend. But it's not just crude oil. I mean, I'm a commodity person. You see it in iron ore, in the grains and corns and soybean and wheat. And then you look at that bond yield in China, it's heading lower, about 1.7%. This is a clear global deflationary trajectory for a lot of commodities, with one exception, copper for now, most notably gold. But crude oil is not alone. Particularly, I have to mention corn, because we get almost 13% of our unleaded gas in this country now from corn, from ethanol.
Yeah, and I should point out too that if we take a look at corn, there's been issues and reports about farmers being worried about labor, et cetera, and that you had President Trump saying like, "Oh, we're going to look into it. We're thinking about it. Things will be fixed." What does that mean? And are you hearing about worker issues when it comes to farmers?
Not in the Corn Belt so much, Alex. Maybe in some of the fruits and vegetables markets, somewhat maybe in California. But that's the key thing about the Corn Belt is we've used maybe such a fraction of people now. The key theme I get out there every time is the technology is moving so fast, even autonomous tractors now, where we just don't need people as much anymore. So if that's a problem, it gets incentivized more this tilt towards technology replacing production and actually increasing supply. So the thing is about the grains, it's global and it's on the back of major supply out of Brazil. And why is that happening? Because prices spiked at the 2022 peak and they're still heading low. We still have that overhang of supply, and that's still the case in things like crude oil.
Hey, Mike, I've been a little remiss here because I've been focusing on gold, and granted, it is up 29% year to date, but spot silver's up 25%. That's a nice little move there.
It's just catching up, but remember, silver's known as the devil's metal for a reason because
the devil's metal.
I've never heard that say
right.
the devil's metal.
Yeah, the devil's metal. It's oftentimes moved, and people who trade it like me, I used to have hair. Its volatility is double that of gold, and right now it's just catching up. So if gold's up about 30% on an annual basis, silver on a volatility weighted basis for risk adjustment should be up about 60%. But the fact is, it's just catching up. It's broke above a pretty good resistance, about $35 an ounce. I think it's getting to 40. It's a matter of time. But most of the metals, including platinum, silver, and a little bit of palladium, are just catching up to gold because they're so cheap relative to beta. And beta in precious metals is gold.
All right, Mike McGlone, thank you so much. I remember years ago, hey, Mike, what's your commodities call? Buy gold and sell everything else. But that was an easy trade, and I blew that again. Missed that easy trade. Mike McGlone, senior commodity strategist, Bloomberg Intelligence, calling in via that Zoom thing from his headquarters in Miami, Florida. So we saw the president making some comments. Again, if he takes any Q&A, we'll try to dip into that. Otherwise, we're just looking at these markets here, the S&P. Not a lot of direction here. It's kind of what we've seen most of the morning here. The Dow's up 7 points. Excuse me, let's start again. The S&P's up 7 points. The Dow is down about 60. And NASDAQ up 11 points. So a lot of red and green on the screen. What is moving? Our yields, they continue to come down here. We got the 10-year yield down about 5 basis points. Let's call it 4.37%. We're going to have more coming up. This is Bloomberg. Good morning.
Wednesday, the Fed decides.
We don't think we need to be in a hurry. We think we can be patient.
How will tariff chaos impact future rate moves?
They're going to be late. They've got no choice but to be late.
Full coverage on a special edition of Bloomberg Surveillance.
There's a question around the new structure of trade.
The Fed rate decision and Powell press conference.
How quickly does the Fed move?
Wednesday starting at 1:30 Eastern. Listen on Bloomberg Radio, on Apple CarPlay or Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app, and on the Bloomberg Podcast YouTube page.
This is the Bloomberg Money Minute. Whole Foods will feel a heavier hand from the parent company. Amazon.com is exerting more control over the supermarket chain. The company bought Whole Foods 8 years ago and mostly allowed the grocer to operate independently. But now Amazon is looking to consolidate and streamline all of its grocery operations. The division also includes Amazon Fresh supermarkets and Amazon Go convenience stores. Across the country, just over 28% of homes are selling for above the asking price, according to Redfin. The company says that's down from nearly a third a year ago. Redfin examined a recent 4-week period and says that around this time in 2022, 53% of homes went for above the asking price. Audio hardware brand Bose has unveiled 3 new upgraded products for the summer, including noise-canceling earbuds and 2 different portable Bluetooth speakers. Oil is rebounding despite concerns about a flare-up in geopolitical risks, more evidence that U.S. inflation is cooling. Kimberly Adams, Bloomberg Radio.
The next generation of Wall Street Week is here.
What could be the story of the century.
Bloomberg's David Weston brings you stories of capitalism.
The train station felt like the right kind of project.
Teaching kids, above all else, is a mission.
The hardest business to change is one that's succeeded for a long time.
The new Wall Street Week.
More than what you need to know, it's what you need to think about.
Fridays at 6 p.m. Eastern on Bloomberg Television and Radio. And anywhere you get your podcasts. Bloomberg Radio. Context changes everything.
I'm Shonali Bassick, and I have a new show.
It's called Bullish, and it's about the future of Wall Street. Join me and Ken Griffin, Boaz Weinstein, Melody Hobson, Jane Fraser, and others as I explore Wall Street South, the rise of influencers. Oh, and I learned how to count cards.
Another black tie.
Oh my God, this is amazing TV.
Watch Bullish Tuesdays on Bloomberg.com or tune in live at 6 p.m. Eastern on Bloomberg TV and 8 p.m. Eastern on Bloomberg Originals.
Bloomberg Hot Pursuit, a weekly podcast that gives car lovers the inside look they crave.
When you get behind the wheel, it's just a beast.
With Matt Miller in New York and Hannah Elliott in LA.
It's very Mad Max / Burning Man.
Listen for the latest trends, new car releases, and anything else that drives us.
Porsche setting altitude records.
That's actually a very drivable Lamborghini.
Bloomberg Hot Pursuit. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app and anywhere you get your podcasts.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Paul Sweeney and Alex Steele on Bloomberg Radio.
Happy Thursday, everybody. Alex Steele here alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We are broadcasting to you live from Interactive Broker Studio right here in Midtown Manhattan. So June is Pride Month. So over the next couple weeks, we're going to highlight segments on topics related to equality. And today we're speaking with Laura Mowdy, a CEO and co-founder of Bobby. Now, Bobby is the only mom-founded and led pediatric nutrition company in the U.S. and the third largest fully integrated infant formula manufacturer in the country. Laura, we remember speaking to you over the pandemic when there were shortages of things like infant formula. What is first and foremost on your radar right now, like the biggest struggle that you have right now?
Lovely to chat with you guys again. Hello. The biggest struggle, I think, right now is, you all remember the infant formula shortage in 2022. There has been a very concentrated effort to make sure that we diversify and break up the concentrated market. And the only way to do that is to invest in more domestic manufacturing. I think the last time I spoke to you guys, I mentioned that we have co-created a bill that really allows and incentivizes more domestic manufacturing for infant formula. And right now, that is the number one focus.
The Infant Formula Made in America Act of 2025. Talk to us about that.
So, again, like I said, this is on the back of the shortage. And what we recognized was nothing will change if nothing changes when it comes to the footprint of infant formula manufacturing. So this bill incentivizes new players to up-level and to break ground and build infant formula manufacturing here in the U.S.
How hard is it? How expensive is it?
It's very expensive. It's very expensive, but maybe nothing like other investments that are being made right now in manufacturing. It takes around 3 years, and it could be anywhere from $60 to $150 million to get a basic footprint in place, and sometimes even more. And given how long it takes to be able to get more manufacturing up and running, this is why we can't wait for another crisis. The investments have to happen now. And what this bill is, and it's finally gotten bipartisan support. I don't actually believe there's anything more bipartisan than investing in how our next generation is fed and building the resiliency of this market. I am just hoping that this bill gets introduced as something that gets passed sooner rather than later.
Just remind us, Laura, where do we source most of our infant formula these days?
Yeah. Look, most of it is sourced domestically. But what we did do is that we allowed some international formulas, some foreign formulas to come into the country on the back of the shortage. We essentially have imported our way out of a crisis, and that is still happening. So over the last few years, we've gone from less than 1% of infant formula being made and sourced in the US to now over 10% of American babies are relying on formula coming in from overseas. And the big push that I'm trying to have is high quality formula should be able to be sourced and made here in America for American babies.
Yes, but because it's expensive to say build the plants here, et cetera, can we get that at a price point where you can stay in business and make money, but also it can be available to all different types of families?
The push I would have on that is it takes more than the private sector to be able to make that happen. And we're talking about infant formula. this is where we need something like this bill to be put in place to help bring down the costs. Because what they are is it's a production tax credit, which means that for every production run we make, there's tax credits given back so that we can bring those costs down. And it's really important that we make those investments today. Otherwise, what we're doing is we're waving the white flag as a country and saying, America's unable to do it. So we're going to allow other countries to feed our babies. Fast forward in 7-10 years, we could be in a much bigger crisis if we're relying on other countries to feed our babies.
Laura, just give us the latest updates for your company, Bobby.
Well, we've been pushing a lot of innovation. I think the one thing we can't lose sight of is that the quality of infant formula deserves its utmost attention on an ongoing basis. So we recently launched the first USDA organic whole milk infant formula made at our facility in Ohio. And we're going to keep watching the way science evolves. And when the scientists say that there's new updates that need to happen, we're going to be making those changes to our product. And my entire focus as a mother is to keep innovating and up-leveling the nutritional requirements of formula for American babies.
Do you have a lot of competition right now?
There is competition. There is competition, and it's healthy competition because we need choice. And this is probably one of the only products in the market that doesn't have enough options. It doesn't have enough choice. And I believe I speak for many parents that when you walk down the formula aisle of a retailer today, it can often be an empty, sad, and lonely aisle. But you're feeding your babies, and it shouldn't be. So I believe and I hope that with something like the domestic manufacturing bill, it actually introduces more competition. We need to see more Bobbies on shelf, and that competition will force all of us to up-level the standards we need.
All right, Laura, thanks a lot. Really appreciate it. Good luck. Laura Mowdy, CEO and co-founder of Bobby, infant formula maker here in the United States. All right, for our listeners in the U.S., here is a reminder. You can listen to us via satellite radio on SiriusXM, channel 121. Access the world's only global audio business network, coast to coast, 24 hours a day. Bloomberg Radio on SiriusXM, channel 121 is presented by ShipStation. Stay with us. Your top stories and global business headlines are coming up right now. As you look at the NASDAQ, up just 1/10 of 1%, the S&P up 0.2%, the Dow is flat. Volume is a little bit mixed. You are continuing to see, though, a bid within the bond market as yields continue to trend lower, down 5 basis points on that 2-year. Good luck trading, guys. We'll see you tomorrow. This is Bloomberg.
Broadcasting 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Radio. Now an update from our partners at CBS News.
This is CBS News on the Hour, your home for original reporting.
I'm Steve Kathan. There's breaking news from the White House. Another federal showdown with California looms as President Trump is signing a resolution blocking the state's move to phase out the sale of gasoline-powered cars.
We officially rescue the U.S. auto industry from destruction by terminating the California electric vehicle mandate once and for all.
That plan had been adopted by 11 other states. California plans to go to courts. A federal judge today hears the state's challenge to the president's deployment of federal troops to L.A. to deal with protests over ICE raids. On Capitol Hill, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and other Democrats are before a House committee defending sanctuary cities.
Minnesotans are angry with what they've seen happen to their neighbors. They're angry that the federal government has been snatching people up, putting them in prison, and deporting them without a shred of due process.
Now to New York and the Harvey Weinstein sex crimes retrial. CBS's Michael Wallace says a mistrial on the last charge was declared.
The jury was stuck on that third-degree rape charge after delivering a partial verdict yesterday. They convicted the former movie mogul of one of the top charges but acquitted him of the other. The judge declared the mistrial after the jury foreperson said he would not return to the jury room to deliberate because he felt bullied by another juror. The verdicts announced yesterday will stand.
Investigators are at work in India after the crash of a Boeing 787 jetliner that was bound for London. CBS's Chanel Call.
The Air India plane we know took off at about 1:38 p.m. local time, and it went down just 8 minutes after takeoff in the western Indian city of Ahmedabad. There were plumes of black smoke coming from the wreckage in the moments after that crash. The plane we know was carrying 242 passengers passengers and crew on board. And at last check, emergency crews on the scene said they'd recovered 204 bodies from the crash site. The CBS News also confirming the tail of the plane landed on a hospital and that several homes were destroyed.
At least 4 people dead in San Antonio. Dozens of water rescues made all over that city as heavy rain flooded highways and left people stranded. A new Forbes Global 2000 list of the top companies that are shaping markets is out. Forbes staff writer Hank Tucker.
The top 5 is JP Morgan, then Berkshire Hathaway, then China's biggest bank, actually the world's biggest bank by assets, the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China. Then at number 4, there's Saudi Aramco, the Saudi Arabian oil company. And then Amazon's number 5.
And checking Wall Street, the Dow's up 12 points. NASDAQ and S&P are trading higher. This is CBS News.
Follow and listen to the CBS Evening News podcast on the free Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Okay, we are running a car drive right now to help veterans all across America. So if you have an old car, truck, or van, even a motorcycle or an RV sitting around, you can right now give it away and help the vets. They really need your help. And your car will help support the vets and their families. And guess what? You even get a tax donation. Plus, we'll even come and pick up your car for free. And all you've got to do is pick up your phone right now and make a free call. Now is the perfect time to do something good for the vets. Give back to the vets right now for all they've done for this country. And your old car can really help them. So call the Veterans Car Donation Program right now for free pickup of your vehicle. Help the vets and help your taxes at the same time. Call right now.
800-640-9509. 800-640-9509. 800-640-9509. That's 800-640-9509.
Stands for something.
A menacing creature may get close to a popular East Coast vacation spot.
Global nonprofit O-Search reports picking up a signal from the dorsal fin of the biggest great white shark researchers have ever recorded off Pamlico Sound in North Carolina. They say 30-year-old-ish contender, who measures 14 feet and weighs more than 1,600 pounds, is likely making a stopover for food to build his energy reserves for the 1,000 or so summer migration to the northeastern U.S. or Atlantic Canada. Deborah Rodriguez, CBS News.
7 families have filed suit challenging Arkansas's upcoming requirements that public school classrooms display the 10 Commandments. Betsy Jocham, the last surviving member of the 1940s Women's Baseball League that inspired the film A League of Their Own, has died. She was 104. I'm Steve Kathan, CBS News.
This is Balance of Power, live from Washington, D.C.
Evacuations begin in Iraq as reports indicate Israel may be about to attack Iran. Welcome to the Thursday edition as the U.S. moves personnel out of the way in key spots throughout the Middle East for fear of possible retaliation. We're going to have the latest on this precarious moment here ahead of more talk set for the weekend with Natasha Hall at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Republicans wrangling over reconciliation with a big meeting today between the leadership and the White House. We'll have the latest from Bloomberg News as we also track the latest on the investigation now into this terrible Air India crash. Analysis today from our panel. Bloomberg Politics contributors Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis are with us. And so we wind up the ban again today. Little Friday with Charlie Pellet and his update on Wall Street in New York. Hey, Charlie.
And indeed, good day, Joe Matthew from New York. We have got the Dow trading lower. Dow Jones Industrial Average right now down 36, down 0.1%. The S&P is advancing by 9 points, up by about 0.2% right now. The Nasdaq Composite Index higher by 25, up 0.1%. Stocks higher as more evidence of cooling inflation extended a week-long drop in bond yields. The 10-year right now 4.36%. The 2-year 3.90%. Gold up $32 the ounce, now up by 1%. Spot gold at $33.87 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude oil just about flat on the day now, $68.20 for a barrel of WTI. Bitcoin now lower by 1.4% at $107,390 on a Bitcoin. The 30-year Treasury auction set to take place at 1 o'clock Wall Street time. Investors watching closely for signs of demand amid concerns over spiraling deficits and the impact of President Trump's tax bill. New data this morning on producer prices. PPI up 0.1% in May, indicating muted inflation across the board and no signs of price shocks from tariffs. Richard Clarida is a global economic advisor to PIMCO, also a former vice chair of the Federal Reserve. And on surveillance this morning, he talked about tariffs and the economic backdrop.
We're not seeing in the data that U.S. companies are using the tariffs as a reason or excuse to raise prices preemptively. We may see that once tariffs go into effect more broadly. But yeah, so far, I think you'd have to acknowledge the U.S. economy is holding up quite well.
Former Fed Vice Chair Richard Clarida interviewed this morning on surveillance. Keeping an eye on Boeing shares. Boeing, a member of the Dow, now lower by 5%. That Boeing 787 Dreamliner operated by Air India crashed shortly after taking off this morning, killing all 242 people on board. The worst accident involving the U.S. playmaker's most advanced twin-aisle aircraft. Again, recapping, S&P right now up 10, gain there of 0.2%. Balance of power continues now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, here he is, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie, great to see you. Charlie Pellet here on the Thursday edition of Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio, satellite radio, channel 121, and on YouTube, where you can find us right now. Search Bloomberg Business News Live as you can watch and listen to the program. Also available on Bloomberg Originals. We're going to have more on this terrible news of the Air India crash a little bit later on this hour with Shelley Banjo as Charlie follows the Wall Street side of this whole story. We've got a couple of plates that we're spinning today, as always, so welcome. It's great to have you aboard. With our eyes on the White House, President Trump has been speaking for a little while right now in an effort to he's got some business at hand. He's now talking about tariffs and a few other matters, but in fact was signing a couple of resolutions. White House called them bills, resolutions that target California's EV incentives. They repeal the state-level mandates that have been in place now, supported by the Biden administration, GM, Toyota, among those lobbying against California's rules. If he makes some news here on the story that we're about to tackle, we'll bring you to the White House, because this is a precarious moment ahead of more talks that are scheduled for this weekend. It may not be an accident, considering the timing with what we're seeing here, but a stark headline at the top of the New York Times: Israel appears ready to attack Iran. Knowing that this has been in the air for some time, and we've talked about it certainly quite a bit since Benjamin Netanyahu made his most recent visit to the White House, a visit in which President Trump reportedly waved him off. And it might be a little bit different this time with what we're hearing. Israel appears to be preparing to launch the attack soon, according to officials in the U.S. and Europe, obviously at a very sensitive time here in the Middle East. But as I mentioned, American and Iranian negotiators are supposed to get back to the table here on Sunday for another round of talks. And that's where we begin our conversation with Natasha Hall. I'm delighted to say she could join us today at this moment. Non-resident Senior Associate, Geopolitics, Foreign Policy Department at CSIS, the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Natasha, it's great to see you. How much of this do we think is bluster ahead of the next round of talks, or is this a real attack that could be in the offing?
Thank you so much for having me. It's a very tense moment, I have to say. And I think that's really the question, whether or not this is a negotiating tactic. As you mentioned, Witkoff is heading to Oman on Sunday for the 6th round of negotiations with Iranian officials, both direct and indirect. And also tomorrow on Friday, Witkoff will meet with Israeli officials, so that Israeli officials can talk about their concerns with regards to the Iranian nuclear program. And one would think it's also about a potential attack. Now, whether or not that attack actually takes place, I think remains to be seen. Because I for sure, Trump does not want a never-ending war. The issue is that Netanyahu does. It protects him politically. And surely there are fears in Israel of any kind of Iranian nuclear activity. But the question, again, and I think I mentioned this the last time I was on the program, is on enrichment. Israel does not want Iran to be able to enrich, and Iran sees it as an issue of sovereignty that they can.
Mm-hmm. Well, so we were just looking at images of Steve Witkoff, who is still planning to attend the negotiations. He certainly knows this, Natasha. Is he capable of walking Iran back from that line? Or have we, in fact, found ourselves at a standoff here?
Well, what's interesting is just yesterday he said that Iran can't enrich uranium. And the U.S. has been back and forth on this, including President Trump. It's unclear if they understand the details of uranium enrichment and a nuclear program for Iran. And I suspect that they're getting a lot of their advice from Israel. Now, the big question is if they are willing to go along with an Israeli attack. Because certainly a coordinated U.S.-Israeli attack on Iranian nuclear facilities would be more profound than Israel going it alone, so to speak. But they would have to at least get the green light. Obviously, Witkoff knows all of this. So potentially we're seeing the evacuation of personnel. We're seeing a lot of this bluster as a means to sort of up the ante prior to these negotiations to really push Iran to the edge. It's still totally well accepted.
Seems like a lot of trouble to be moving all these people to just put on a show. But Natasha, we do have and a really important piece of news here that Steve Witkoff will have with him at the table. This is the hook the administration, I guess, could lean on if, in fact, an attack moved forward here. The IAEA declaring Thursday Iran is not complying with nuclear non-proliferation obligations, the first time the UN's watchdog has passed a resolution against the country in 20 years. What did you think when you saw that headline?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting because, again, you said it's unprecedented. It is unprecedented, and it shows that the U.S. is working with the E3 and with the IAEA on really putting the pressure on Iran to move forward with this. So, I mean, we could be hopeful. But again, last year we saw something like 170 Iranian proxy attacks on U.S. assets in the region. So very, very scary times. I think we'll see a lot of tensions, especially in some of these other countries like Iraq, where there are softer targets as well. But the IAEA can't do much, but it is another negotiating tactic, I think.
Well, you make an interesting point here about U.S. involvement, because it does seem that Israel would need some help based on some of the reporting that we've done here. You consider the use of bunker busters, air defenses, refueling. How far would the U.S. go in taking part here?
I mean, I think that's the $1 million question. It's unclear if the U.S. would even be public about coordination with Israel. I think most people would agree that they would be green lighted. And in order to do the attack, it would be quite brazen for Israel to go it alone. But judging by the statements of Witkoff and of Trump in recent days, it looks like they are very publicly giving the green light, which is, again, why they're evacuating personnel. But I would just say one more thing for your listeners. An attack on an Iranian nuclear facility has happened before. But Iran just goes back to enriching uranium at another level and accelerates potentially. So we could see that again. And, quite frankly, we've been talking about rising tensions in the Middle East quite a bit for 2 years, and it's unclear where this ends. But hopefully it will come to some kind of de-escalation by next week, because I think everyone is on the edge of their seats at this moment in the region.
Israel certainly believes it's in the position of power here, right, Natasha? As we've discussed, there are a couple of reasons why we found ourselves at this moment, and a lot of it has to do with the lack of air defenses right now that Iran has following the most recent back and forth with Israel, but also an emboldened Benjamin Netanyahu following some of the strife that we've seen in the region here. The idea as well that Iran would respond with hundreds of ballistic missiles, as I read in this story in the New York Times, is being laughed at by Israel, because last time they tried that, most of them were knocked down, Natasha. Does Israel not have the moment that it was looking for?
Iran is in a very vulnerable position, as you point out. There was many different Israeli attacks on Iran and Iranian proxies last year that severely degraded Iran, including Hezbollah, which Iran uses to essentially launch attacks onto Israel and neighboring Lebanon. It doesn't really have that as much anymore, and certainly not Iran and Syria. And so Iran is in a very, very vulnerable position. That said, again, Iran doesn't go to war toe-to-toe with the U.S. or Israel. it sort of negotiates itself in the weeds of these various countries like Iraq. And I would have you know that, the 170 attacks also last year, Iranian attacks, very few casualties of U.S. airmen, of U.S. servicemen. And so, it's weak attacks, but it does, up the ante considerably. And it makes it much, much harder for the U.S. to have a presence in the Middle East as well.
We're out of time, Natasha. If this happens, would it be after Sunday?
I would suspect this would be after Sunday. Yes, for sure. I think, again, whether or not this is for real or not, it's certainly a negotiating tactic.
This next round of talk is going to be critically important. Natasha Hall, I'm so glad that you could join us from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, a real voice of expertise that we can bring you here on Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. We've got a lot more to talk about. Laura Davidson's going to join us coming up next as we turn our attention to reconciliation. And Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall will pay a visit to us here. We're live from the nation's capital on the Thursday edition on Bloomberg. Make sure to subscribe to the Balance of Power podcast. Go to Spotify, Apple, whatever you do for your podcast. Find Balance of Power and subscribe. Watch us live on YouTube and listen anytime at Bloomberg.com.
Everything you love about Bloomberg Radio is now inside your car. The new Bloomberg Business app featuring Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. All your favorite Bloomberg Radio shows right on your dashboard. Download it free in the Apple App Store or on Google Play.
A warming planet, complex geopolitics, and fierce competition means business operations are under more scrutiny than ever before. Returning to Singapore this July, the Bloomberg Sustainable Business Summit is uniting leaders and investors to explore how sustainability efforts can bolster resilience and mitigate risk. Learn more at bloomberglive.com/SBS-Singapore. That's bloomberglive.com/SBS-Singapore.
The best way to listen to Bloomberg Radio is on Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. Download the Bloomberg Business app on your smartphone today, then listen to us anywhere from coast to coast and around the globe. Get it all, live radio, podcasts, and news updates on demand at the click of a button. The Bloomberg Business app, now on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Download it free in the Apple App Store or on Google Play. Bloomberg Radio. Context changes everything. Bloomberg Radio, on demand and in your podcast feed.
On the latest edition of the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast, Francis Donald, RBC Capital Markets.
Well, there's all sorts of measures of uncertainty, and no surprising, whatever measure you're using is at an all-time high. And what that means for forecasters, but also for businesses, my clients, the CEOs that I talk to all the time.
What do you hear from them?
What I hear is we have to risk manage around downside and upside. We can't have one scenario that we base our business operations on. We have to plan and prepare for a wide range. But this uncertainty, it is not actual policy that is problematic here. Although, yes, there are some elements of it that are problematic. It's what is the game that we're playing? We cannot write the playbook until we know what the game is itself. And so forecasters and businesses are actually operating with much wider set of scenarios available to them.
So you go into 245 Ouellette Avenue. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
I'm not sure.
I think I'm close. Windsor, Ontario.
Windsor, Ontario.
Ouellette. I think it's sort of like edge of French, but it's in Ontario. I don't know. I'm lost. RBC branch in Ouellette in Windsor, Ontario. What's the confidence there to invest? I don't see it.
Interesting you chose Windsor. Windsor has one of the highest unemployment rates in the entire country in Canada. It's at
like
11%. 11%
wow.
unemployment rate. But then if you were to head to the beautiful island of Victoria, BC, you would find that the unemployment rate is 3%. What is this? This is what tariffs do, and it's happening in America as well, which is that you're going to have sectors within the global economy, the U.S. economy, the Canadian economy that are operating in very real, I'll go back on my recession, no recession comment, very real recessions.
Hear the full conversation on the latest edition of the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Subscribe on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Plus, listen anytime on the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
It's 12:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got the Dow just turning negative right now, in the red. Little change, perhaps the key takeaway at this hour, looking at the Dow down by half a point. S&P 500 index, though, off session highs, up 15 now, up by about 0.3%. The Nasdaq Composite Index up 47, up 0.2%. The Nasdaq 100 Index doing a little bit better, up now by 0.3%. But a down day for small cap shares. We have got the Dow lower now by 0.5%. Your 10-year, 4.36%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Thank you for being with us on Balance of Power. We're going to steer you right back to the White House, as we told you. President Trump has just stepped up to the podium to take some questions after signing a couple of resolutions on California EV incentives. Let's get to live Q&A here from the White House on Bloomberg.
I told you the Auto Workers Union, we got tremendous votes, but they like me today even better than they did on Election Day on November 5th, because they see the results now. They're all happening. And yeah, and they have plants moving in, Brian. A lot of plants are moving in. Thank you very much for that question. Yeah.
Was Governor Gavin Newsom trying to kill the auto industry?
Oh, he was killing the auto industry. I don't think he knew it. I think he's a guy who, he's just got a faulty thought process. You look at that train, the train is the most, I've seen people, stupid people with cost overruns for years. I've watched where something would cost twice as much or 3 times. But this thing is costing 20 times more. It's the most incredible disaster I've ever seen. That's one. The cars are just as bad. Everything's bad. And now you have this situation. So his own sheriff, who's a good man, by the way, said 2 days ago or 3 days ago that we could not have done this without the military. They were going to take over this whole, they couldn't have done it. Now today they got him to change his tune. He said, oh, I think we could have handled it. You know, it's so sad. He was so honest. I was using his quote all over the place, and they got him to change. But he knows. Los Angeles would be right now burning to the ground, just like the houses burned to the ground. It's so sad what's going on in Los Angeles. Think of it. They had a fire that should have never had because they should have listened to me in the water. Eventually, we broke in and we had the water come down from the Pacific Northwest. I could show you pictures now with the half pipes, the big half pipes coming all the way down California. Water, so much water. They don't have any droughts. They don't have any. They have so much water. They sent it all out to the Pacific Ocean for 20 years. So ridiculous. And we got them to take it now. But what they do and what they're doing, this is a big problem. And what they really want to do is keep criminals, because they're trying to protect criminals. Sanctuary cities are a disaster in this country. And most of the voters don't want them. Politicians like them for whatever reason, but I think the politicians are wrong. That's why we won in such a convincing fashion. We won all 7 swing states. We won by millions of votes. We won 2,750 districts as opposed to 505. That's why when you look at the map, it's almost all red. It's got 2 little blue stripes on each side of it. It's almost all red. But now you have to... I always got along with Gavin. I like Gavin. I've liked him, always. He said I never called him. You know, they asked him a question on Fox, I guess. I never spoke to him. He doesn't remember the call. He doesn't remember. I never spoke. And then I produced a phone call. I had it. It took me about 2 minutes. I said, well, here's the call. It lasted 16 minutes and 4 seconds. And it was at 12:30 in the evening. I actually made a call, didn't pick up. I called him a second time, and he picked up. And I told him, I said, you have to get your ass in gear because you're going to have a problem there. And he would have. If we didn't bring the military in, he would have had, you would have right now something. And I went through it because I follow the rules 100%. And I watched in Minnesota where you have the man who ran for vice president of the United States. Fortunately, he was a disaster. But he wouldn't call in the National Guard. And I eventually called in the National Guard, but it was seven days late. I said, I'll never do that again. I'm never going to, if I see problems brewing, if they're not going to do the problem, I'm not going to wait 2 weeks. Because that city, Minneapolis, burned down. If you remember the CNN anchor, He was standing there saying, yes, this is a peaceful rally. And behind him, the entire city was on fire. It looked like World War II. And I appreciate the question. Yes.
Mr. President, thank you very much for taking.
Thank you.
Two questions, if I may, sir. First, the terrible, horrific plane crash in India today. I'm sure you saw the images on TV. Your reaction to that first, and will you speak to Prime Minister Modi?
The plane crash was terrible. I've already told them anything we can do. It's a big country, a strong country, and they'll handle it, I'm sure. But I let them know that anything we can do, we'll be over there immediately. But it was a horrific crash. It looks like most are gone. They actually maybe have a couple survivors, which is just heard. But that was a horrible crash. Nobody knows. Nobody has any idea what it might be. I gave him a couple of pointers. I said, maybe you look at this or that. You know, we saw the plane. It looked like it was flying pretty well. It didn't look like there was an explosion. It just looked like the engines maybe lost power. But boy, that is a terrible crash. It's one of the worst in aviation history. Yeah, second.
How confident are you, sir, that conflict with Iran can be avoided?
Well, I'd love to avoid the conflict. Iran's going to have to negotiate a little bit tougher, meaning they're going to have to give us some things that they're not willing to give us right now. I'm the last person. I've kept us out of wars. We defeated ISIS completely, 100%, and I haven't had it's peace through strength. I believe in peace through strength. We're the greatest military in the world. I rebuilt the military, as you remember, for 4 years. I rebuilt the military, and then we gave a chunk of it away, but it was still peanuts. It was a lot, but it was peanuts compared to what we rebuilt. Gave it to Afghanistan, one of the most embarrassing moments in the history of our country with the whole withdrawal, the way they withdrew was very embarrassing. But we rebuilt the military. We have the greatest, strongest military. We defeated ISIS. We defeated ISIS. We defeated ISIS in 4 weeks. It was told to be 5 years. It was going to take 5 years, anywhere from 4 to 5 years. We did it in 4 weeks, with, by the way, headed by the general who's now the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. That's why he's there. He said it would take 4 weeks, and he did it in 4 weeks. He did actually a little bit faster. So we have a great country, and we're going to keep it that way. And when it comes to Los Angeles or other cities, if we see other cities are gearing up, and these people are agitators, they're paid, they're professionals, they're insurrectionists, they're troublemakers, they're all of those things. But I believe they're paid, and we're going to find out through Pam Bondi and her great staff, her great people at Justice, who they are. And Mike, I think you're doing some investigations in that in Congress, but we're going to find out who they are, because they're really, I think what they're doing is unbelievably illegal. Just one thing. So they took the bricks away from people. They're walking in with satchels of bricks. Now, why do you have bricks? You have bricks because you throw bricks. They're very potent. If they hit you, they kill you. And they took them away. The military took them away. They saw him. What the hell is this? The guy could hardly carry him. Many bricks. He's a strong guy, couldn't carry him. And they saw that, and they took him away. Then they found others with bricks. But they're ingenious. They also brought hammers along, very heavy hammers. And I saw them pounding the curb and pounding the sidewalk. And it was like a military operation. This guy's pounding strong, boom, big shots. And it was breaking up granite, the granite curbs. And the granite was breaking up, and the concrete was breaking up. And there was lines of people standing there, and they're handing him. And then he stopped handing them. They just went down and picked him up. It was so professional. I said, that's a professional organization. This is not like people at random. This guy's breaking up because they couldn't use the bricks. So who would think of this even? Did a lot of damage. A lot of curbs are broken. A lot of sidewalks broken. But I never saw that before. That's one I haven't seen. I thought I saw it all. And they have it on tape. And with that, people get killed. You know, they go to the bridges and they drop the concrete off the top of the bridge with a car coming along at 70 miles an hour, and the person dies. And we had a lot of car problems. You saw that. They were all over the road. They were littered all over the road where the cars got stopped by concrete going through the front windshield. These are bad people. If we didn't go, Los Angeles right now would be on fire. It would be a disaster. And we stopped it. And last night was very good. Nobody showed up. You know why they didn't show up? Because we were there. If it was just the police, because the police are great. I know those police, they're great, but they're told not to do anything. They're not allowed to act. Thank you.
Mr. President, how imminent is an Israeli strike on Iran?
Well, I don't want to say imminent, but it looks like it's something that could very well happen. Look, it's very simple, not complicated. Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. Other than that, I want them to be successful. I want them to be tremendous. We'll help them be successful. We'll trade with them. We'll do whatever is necessary. You know, I stopped a war between India and Pakistan. And I stopped it with trade. I don't think I've ever seen a story written about it, but it was pretty cool. They were getting ready. Pakistan was their turn to hit, and eventually they're going to go nuclear. And I stopped it. I called I respect each leader greatly. I know them. And I spoke to them, and I talked about trade. I said, but you're not trading with us if you're going to go to war, if you're going to start throwing nuclear weapons around. And I said it to both of them, and they were both unbelievable, actually. They understood it exactly. They stopped. I stopped that war with phone calls and trade. And India's here right now negotiating a trade deal, and Pakistan's coming, I think, next week. And I'm very proud of that. Nobody died. The nuclear weapons, they each have very severe, very substantial numbers of nuclear weapons. And I think we should get some credit for that. You know, the whole Republican Party should, because that's their mindset. Please.
Mr. President.
Yes, ma'am. What?
On your China deal, Mr. President, are you still concerned about the national security issues with Chinese students studying in the United States?
Look, I've always been in favor of students coming in from other countries. That includes China. And we have 500,000 Chinese students coming in. I've always been in favor of it. Does it mean that you have to watch people? Yeah, you have to watch students, but you have to watch other people also. I've always been strongly in favor of it. I think it's a great thing. It's good for our schools. I think it's good for our country. I'm also in favor of having them stay. I've been in favor of letting them stay. If you get educated for 4 years, you're willing to get educated for 4 years. I like people being able to stay. You know, they have some great students. You have some, these are Republicans clapping, you know, because a lot of Republicans don't like that idea. I happen to like it. I'm a real Republican, believe it or not. But I like the idea. They go 4 years. To me, that's almost like, you know, just buying your way in a very legitimate way. And, you know, you have stories where Apple wants to hire somebody and they can't hire because he can't stay. He went to a great school. He finished first in his class. They made him a big offer and everything's done, but he has no idea whether or not he's going to be able to stay. And I'm all for making sure that people like that can go to work for all of our great companies. And you know what they do? They go back to their country, and there are stories that are all over the place. They go back to their company, and they start a company just like they were going to start here. They end up starting it in China or India or someplace else, and now they're among the richest people in the world. They've got thousands and thousands of employees that make it great. This is happening all the time because they're not allowed to stay, and I think we'll probably end up doing something about that, right? Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. You in the blue, please. Light blue.
Thank you, Mr. President. How close are you to setback between Ukraine and Russia? We see a very bad escalation. Are you going to leave it in the hands of the Europeans?
I'm very close to the situation. I'm very disappointed in Russia. But I'm disappointed in Ukraine also, because I think deals could have been made. And, you know, we're losing 5,000, 6,000 people a week, soldiers mostly, but also people living in towns because they're getting hit by missiles again. How'd you like to live in a building and you think a missile has a good chance of hitting your building during the evening? It's horrible. Must be horrible to live like that. But, I mean, we'll get it, but it's, I'm disappointed that it's not done. We did great with India and Pakistan. We did very good with Israel. I thought, look, October 7th was a disaster. People forget, you know, they like to forget. That was a horrible thing. But, you know, none of these things would have happened if I were president. If I were president, none of it would have happened. You wouldn't have the Israel problem. Iran was broke. They had no money. We had big sanctions on them. Biden immediately let them get rich, the $300 billion they have right now. But they had no money for Hamas or Hezbollah. They had no money for anything. It was perfect. We wouldn't have had inflation that was caused by oil, Chris. The oil price went through the roof. It was also caused by their spending, but it was caused more by oil than anything else. The oil went so high, got close to $100 a barrel. And that cost, and that also kept the war going with Putin, because at $100 a barrel, that was a big money-making experience. But now it's down to where it's not so good for them anymore. No, it's very important to get that solved. That's a bloodbath. That's a terrible bloodbath that's going on. Yeah, please go ahead.
Mr. President, following the question answer on India and Pakistan for stopping the war between them, India says that they cannot talk to Pakistan unless Pakistan takes actions against terrorists.
We're going to get those two getting together. You know, I told them, India and Pakistan, they've had a long time rivalry over Kashmir, and I said I can solve anything. I'll be your arbitrator. I will be your arbitrator. I can solve anything. And I saw the first question, how long has it been going on? They said, 2,000 years. I said, oh, that's all right. Maybe I'll think about it. When I heard 2,000 years, I said, maybe I'll have John Hess solve that problem.
Mr. President, will you punish Israel for striking Iran?
Peter?
Thank you, President Trump. I have two. First, on immigration. What made you change your mind about targeting in California farmers and people in the hotel and leisure business?
Well, we're not targeting. In fact, if you look today, I put out a statement today about farmers. Our farmers are being hurt badly by, you know, they have very good workers. They've worked for them for 20 years. They're not citizens, but they've turned out to be, you know, great. And we're going to have to do something about that. We can't take farmers and take all their people and send them back because they don't have maybe what they're supposed to have, maybe not. And you know what's going to happen and what is happening? They get rid of some of the people because, you know, you go into a farm and you look and people don't, they've been there for 20, 25 years and they've worked great and the owner of the farm loves them and everything else. And then you're supposed to throw them out. And you know what happens? They end up hiring the people, the criminals that have come in, the murderers from prisons and everything else. So we're going to have an order on that pretty soon, I think. We can't do that to our farmers and leisure too, hotels. We're going to have to use a lot of common sense on that.
And my other question about the Middle East. As the Israelis apparently gear up for some kind of an attack, a possible attack on Iran, are you trying to talk Netanyahu out of doing that, or are you so against Iran having a nuclear weapon that you're okay, he does his thing because it is not an American war?
Yeah, it's a very fair question. Look, I want to have an agreement with Iran. We're fairly close to an agreement. We are fairly close to a pretty good agreement. It's got to be better than pretty good, though, but it's got to be, I'd much prefer an agreement. As long as I think there is an agreement, I don't want them going in because I think I would blow it. Might help it, actually, but it also could blow it. But we've had very good discussions with Iran. Whether or not we get there, I can't tell you, but it'll happen soon. I say this, Peter, very strongly. They can't have, whether it's going in or not going in, they can't have a nuclear weapon. I'd prefer the more friendly path.
And can you tell us what the Israelis told you that made you start to evacuate the dependents of servicemen and women who are stationed in the Middle East?
They didn't tell me anything, but I said, look, there's a chance of massive conflict. We have a lot of American people in this area, and I said, we got to tell them to get out because something could happen soon. And I don't want to be the one that didn't give any warning and missiles are flying into their buildings. It's possible. So I had to do it. You know, I had the choice. Do I do it or not? Doing it has its downside, but it also has its upside. Like, you're going to save a lot of lives if it should happen. Hopefully that doesn't happen. Right? Thank you.
Mr. President, for Americans that are coming to Washington on Saturday for military parade,
It's going to be a great day.
what would you like folks to take away from that day? What would you hope that they would remember? And also, Mr. President,
our country is. and how strong our military is. We have the strongest military in the world. You know, it's very interesting. 3 weeks ago, it was the end of world anniversary, end of World War II. And I called France, and Macron, who's a good man, I said, what are you doing? He goes, we're celebrating World War II, our victory. I said, your victory? Your victory. Tell me about that. And then I called somebody else, and I happened to speak to President Putin at the time. Now, in all fairness to him, he lost 51 million people, and he did fight. Russia fought. Sort of interesting, isn't it? He fought with us in World War II, and everybody hates him. And Germany and Japan, they're fine. You know, someday somebody will explain that, but I like Germany and Japan too. But Putin is a little confused by that, you know. He said, we lost 51 million people, and we were your ally. And now everybody hates Russia, and they love Germany and Japan. I said, let's explain that sometime, okay? But it's a strange world. But I will say this, look, I want them to go away saying how great our country is and how great our military is. And I was making all these calls. For some reason, I spoke to like 4 different places. Sir, are you celebrating? And I said, you know, we won World War II and World War I, right? We won them. And yet we're the only country that doesn't celebrate. Everybody's celebrating except us. And I said, we should celebrate too.
There are several No Kings protests planned across the country on Saturday as well. What are your thoughts on those?
What do they call No Kings?
No Kings.
I don't feel like a king. I have to go through hell to get stuff approved. A king would say, I'm not going to get this. A king would have never had the California mandate to even be talking to him. He wouldn't have to call up Mike Johnson and Thune and say, fellas, you got to pull this off, and after years we get it done. No, we're not a king. We're not a king at all. Thank you very much. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Sir,
Go ahead.
Mr. President, sir, you made a lengthy posting today on Truth Social about Senator Rand Paul. Do you expect to see him at the picnic tonight, sir?
I do. I look forward to seeing him, actually. I like him. He's the hardest vote in the history of the U.S. Senate to get. Probably won't get him, but he's a very tough vote. I mean, he's a very tough vote. He's always been a friend of mine. You know, I endorsed him and got him elected. I got him elected twice. But I don't think he understands how great this bill is. This is a great bill. No tax on tips, no tax on, you know, the Social Security payments. It's unbelievable what happens. No tax on overtime. You work overtime, no more tax. So those are big, but they're minor compared to the big things. Taxes reduced. And let's look at the other side. If it doesn't get approved, a 68% tax increase, 68%, including the fact that the Trump tax cuts kick in. But it's a 68% tax increase and many other bad things. I don't even want to, some of them are so bad I don't even want to talk about them. I think it's one of the greatest bills we'll ever pass in this country. And I think that Leader Thune and this gentleman right here, what he's gone through on this with, you know, we started off with a majority of 1. Now I guess we have 7. So it's like easier, but it's really sort of 3. It's 7, but it really equates to 3, right? And we have great support. I mean, I can't tell you, I can't guarantee, but when you have a majority of essentially 3, where you can't lose anything more than 3 votes, and you get it passed, it's pretty amazing. And I think it's going to haunt the Democrats because most of the bill is common sense. It's tax cuts, it's border wall funding, it's military funding properly spent. It's all things that are like common sense. They're all good. There's nothing tricky about it. It's basic stuff. And we don't intend on getting one, think of it, not one Democrat vote in the House. Mike, not one. Maybe somebody will come along. I don't know how they can run for office. So many different things. We're gonna very important, Medicare and Medicaid are gonna be strengthened, not hurt. You know, they're using fake narrative. Oh, we're gonna, no, they're gonna be strengthened. We're gonna strengthen them. They're gonna destroy them because under their policies, Medicare and Medicaid go away. Social Security under them is gonna be devastated. With us, it's gonna be kept, but much stronger than before. And very interestingly, I saw this and I proved it because for 4 years, I never hurt Medicare, Medicaid, or Social Security. I've already been there. but they're going to destroy Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. They're going to wipe them out, in my opinion, because their policies are so bad, the country will have no money to pay for them. We're going to make them stronger than ever before. Thank you very much, everybody.
All right, there you have President Trump live at the White House taking a series of questions about a range of issues. We covered a lot of ground there, and thanks for being with us on Bloomberg Radio, satellite radio, channel 121, and YouTube, where you may have been watching the president. He's working his way out of the room now, shaking some hands, having taken the dive, as I mentioned, on a number of issues. From the matter at hand, he was there to sign resolutions repealing, essentially, state-level EV incentives in California. That was the whole purpose of today, but this went into a range of other topics that we can walk through here, from Iran and beyond. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall in Washington. I want to seize on this matter of Iran for a moment because of its urgency. Tyler, the president was asked a number of times about this, knowing that there are talks set for this weekend in Oman. That's on Sunday, and we're seeing what could be a lot of bluster, but a lot of reports suggesting that Israel is in fact preparing an imminent attack against Tehran and its nuclear facilities. The president just said that could very much still happen.
Very well happen. That's what he said. He also said that the U.S. is fairly close to an agreement with Iran as these negotiators do go in, but that they will have to give us things they're not willing to. That's a direct quote from President Trump. Of course, these comments coming after we earlier saw a New York Post interview that the president gave where he said he was less confident that the U.S. really was going to be able to reach a deal. Of course, these are negotiations over Iran's nuclear activities in exchange for potential sanctions relief from the United States. President Trump has not taken off the table, of course, that there could be military action if there is not a deal reached.
All this, of course, almost on the eve of the military parade in downtown Washington. The president was asked about the No Kings protests, making pretty clear that he doesn't see himself as a king. We also talked about what's happening more broadly in California and specifically in Los Angeles, Tyler, when we get to the protests and the deployment of troops, National Guard and Marine Corps troops, and an important hearing that's going to be taking place today in court in San Francisco, knowing, of course, that Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, has sued the administration to turn back those troops. And that's where we want to start today with our political panel. Rick and Jeannie are both with us, Bloomberg Politics contributors. Jeannie Shanzano, our Democratic analyst, senior democracy fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. And Rick Davis, Republican strategist, partner at Stone Court Capital. Great to see you both. Jeannie, I don't know if this court hearing is going to generate anything decisive by the end of the day, and we're hearing that it may well not. But does Gavin Newsom have any leverage in court to stop the troops who are in Los Angeles?
It's going to be fascinating. By the way, I don't know if you and Tyler agree. I thought maybe President Trump would break out into a song from Les Mis after last night. I was waiting
He had
for
a
that.
big night.
Didn't get that. But, you know, the court is going to be fascinating, not only because it's Stephen Breyer's brother who is hearing the case, which is one fascinating aspect of it, but because it's going to be an uphill battle for the governor. The reality is that the president is likely going to have ground to stand on here, particularly as it pertains to the National Guard, number one, because it's not unprecedented. And number two, because they are going to argue, they being the Justice Department, that these are foreign folks that are in here and the state is not doing enough. And they're going to use the examples of the waving of the Mexican flag and to say that this is a national issue. He is the president, so he has every right to nationalize these troops. Hard to tell how this comes down, but I do think it's likely probably going to go the president's way.
We've got a headline on the terminal here and a story that we are preparing to follow today that lands in the noontime hour Eastern time, the IPO of Chime. Chime Financial, CHYM, the ticker, out of the gates here at $43, remembering the IPO price was $27. And pretty remarkable, Tyler, this thing is moving. We're up 65% here again, coming out of the IPO price, topping, now approaching actually $45. And one of the stories that we're going to be keeping very handy today on Wall Street. This is something that, of course, follows the very successful IPO of Circle and brings us to an interesting place. The story behind this company is really fascinating, Tyler, because Chime has really made its mark as a bank for those with lower incomes, living paycheck to paycheck, 35% or more female employees, and they're giving the big boys a run for their money. In fact, competing with the likes of JP Morgan Chase and Bank of America. Big reaction today in the market.
Yeah, exactly, Joe. And the offering raised $864 million for the company and some of its investors, with 32 million shares priced above a marketed range of $24 to $26 each.
There you have it. We're just below $44 for a share of Chime, up 61%. We'll keep tabs on this for you and bring in some experts in our program as we want to stick with the panel on this. Rick, we just heard from the president, and we're going to be hearing from the court. We're going to be hearing from the judge at some point later on today in this Trump versus Newsom world that we are in. Has Gavin Newsom succeeded in becoming at least the temporary head of the Democratic Party?
Yeah, I think a lot of these initiatives like the lawsuit and even the troops, I mean, these are two of the most performative politicians in the history of the world. And so they use these platforms as political weapons. And I think it almost doesn't matter what the outcome is of the court case today, because Gavin Newsom's already gotten his value for standing up to Donald Trump, making the lawsuit, saying, that he's not adding to the peace, he's creating controversy. And it covers some of his tracks on the fact that you do have looters, you do have a bad situation in L.A., and we hope it all resolves itself quickly, regardless of whether there's troops there or not. So President Trump, of course, he's been warning about these things. He just repeated his concerns that he didn't act quick enough, in the past, and so he's not going to hesitate in the future. And I think that as these other protests spread throughout the country, which there was even a...
Welcome to our TV network, your ultimate destination for all things exciting and essential. From mouth-watering food to the latest in fashion, health, education, music, movies, and news. Plus thrilling sports and breathtaking travel. Our TV network brings it all to you. Tune in today and experience the best of every world. All in one place, rtv.network.